being a mom for once, besides she will be back before the end of this meeting and before we have the turf discussion. The first orders of business are a revised agenda. We're rearranging specifically because Christina wished to participate in the turf discussion. We are moving 9A policies to 8A unfinished business so that all policy and adoption and discussion occurs at the same time. We are moving 9C leadership council between 8A and 8B since this is unfinished business. We're moving item 9, a personnel matter. It will not be an executive session. However, we will be adding 2 other executive sessions later in the meeting. 9M, appointment of, we're adding a line item on 9M to appoint a spokesperson to speak with media. And I believe that we should have some student council attendees. And I would love, thank you very much for coming. Your presence is always a joy.
Thank you for having us.
Great. Okay, now I have to go back to the real agenda. So please do bear with me because I'm flipping back between pages and I have vision issues. First order of business would be, and if anyone who catches me making a mistake, please go ahead and correct me. We have the clerk's report, and I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
I would move that we approve the minutes on October 16th and October 23rd.
Do we have a second?
I second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Oh, this is going quickly.
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, the ayes have it. The minutes are approved. I'd like to welcome everybody who came out to talk to us this evening. Please do sign in. I'm not sure where the list went, but the law requires us to record all attendees. Bathrooms are downstairs, which is a quick and important thing. We will take public comment before taking any action from any WSESD resident, student, staff member, or anyone directly affected by the agenda. Please wait to be recognized by the chair, direct your comments to the chair, and avoid any personal attacks. I've been insulted 5 times today, and my patience is about this big. Comment time is 2 minutes. Additional time will be granted if required. And at the end of the meeting, we will take comment for any non-agenda items. Has everyone received the many communications that Christina sent around? Okay. Are there any additional communications anyone needs to share with us?
So generally I don't at this point, but I did just receive a communication on the turf field from the Windham County NAACP and asked to share it with you this evening. Is now the time to do
That's a
that?
great contract.
And I apologize, I just got this. Normally I would have sent it to you all ahead of time. Dear WSESD members, the National NAACP has taken a strong stance concerning climate justice and seeks to ensure that it does its part to fight the impact of climate change and its effect on our communities. Thus, as the branch representing Windham County, Vermont, we feel the need to provide sharp commentary on these matters. It has come to our attention that you are considering a proposal to replace the grass football field with a synthetic turf football field at the Brattleboro Union High School. We want you to know that we are vehemently opposed to the construction of this synthetic turf field. The creation of this field is not only costly, but it is also, as pointed out in the letter from concerned community members, potentially dangerous to all students due to the emittance of harmful chemicals. Since the letter from community members so eloquently addresses the potential harm to both the climate and our youth that drives from the construction of this field, we do not feel the need to restate their points. Instead, we would like to propose a few questions that we hope spark a meaningful conversation around equity. Question 1, if this field turns out to be as harmful as data suggests, what groups of students do you believe would be most impacted? Question 2, if students are impacted, do you feel their families could afford to pay healthcare costs? Question 3, do you plan to consult members from historically marginalized communities, i.e. low socioeconomic, racial minorities, disabled, etc., before making your decision? Question 4, how does the construction of this field align the values around equity and justice the WSESD espouses? Thank you, Stefan Gillen, the Windham County NAACP.
Thank you, Aya. Do we have any other communications?
You should send it to me electronically, and I will send it on to you.
Okay, I will do that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question?
You may.
Do these communications get posted on the web?
I believe that they do. If they haven't been, then that can certainly be done.
And where would I find it? I'm not very good at going around the web.
Jim, no. It should be attached to our minutes or agenda on the WSESD page, but don't hold me to that because I'm not entirely sure. But if they're not there, I will personally see to it that they are, or you can go somewhere and look at them otherwise.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so where are we? Committee reports. Now I can go back to the other page, and we will begin with finance.
Finance Subcommittee of the WSESD met this evening at 5 till 6 o'clock, and we approved the warrants. We didn't approve, we went over the warrants and payrolls. That approval will come later in this meeting. And then we had a discussion about the turf field improvement project. There was input from administration and central office and members of the public and members of the subcommittee, the financial subcommittee. And our last agenda item was budget planning timeline. But we kind of ran out of time, so we'll take that up at another meeting. That's about it.
Well, while you've got you there, how about the personnel committee? This is literally the they're typed in.
Yes, thank you very much. The Personnel Committee actually has not met since our last meeting, and we did report at the last meeting, our first and only meeting so far. Oh, no.
Kelly's the chair.
Yes. Oh,
That's
thank
right,
you.
I completely
Thank you.
forgot, because he was the
Thank you.
coordinator of getting it started. I apologize, Kelly.
Mistake. Yes, I'm sorry, Kelly.
So the committee moved to authorize the superintendent and the business manager of the WSESU to negotiate classified and certified contracts with personnel on behalf of the board.
Now, do we have to move that formally later in the meeting, or, okay, shall we do it now? Shall we take that as a motion, Kelly?
Sure.
Okay,
Second.
thank you.
I'm sorry, can you read I didn't catch the motion. What's the motion?
To authorize the superintendent and the business manager of the WSESU to negotiate classified and certified contracts on behalf of the board.
Thank you.
Is there any discussion? So, we're all fine with this, or? Sure, Jody?
Just a question. Does any of the board members get to be part of this negotiation, or is it strictly the administration that's doing the negotiation? I'm an old timer, so please let me know.
They will do the negotiating. If we need to be brought in, we will be brought in at a later date. And I'm sorry, if you have a question, please announce your name and your town.
Jody Normando, Dummerston.
Thank you, Jody. So, is there any further discussion? Yes.
Henry King, Brattleboro. Are we to assume that Lyle and Frank will be the only two negotiators for on behalf of the board, or are there other negotiators? Point of clarification.
They will be, as they have been in the past, the only negotiators, but it will be brought before the personnel committee and, of course, the entire board before we ratify any kind of contract. Anyone else? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Hearing none, the ayes have it, and our negotiating team has been established. Christina is not here for the Policy and Amendment Committee. Dave, would you be willing to?
Oh gosh, there are a lot of policies. We finished, well, there's a vote coming up on November 19th, I hope everyone knows, and there are 4 articles, and they are designed to balance the concerns of the towns regarding the whole unified or the whole merged board. And one of them adds 2 additional board members so that we have 10, so we have someone who will be able to sit on leadership council in each of the 10 schools. And those 2 will come from Brattleboro to help deal with the underrepresentation of Brattleboro being 6 times larger than the other towns. And the smaller town issue concerns about big old Brattleboro closing their schools or removing grades or removing parts of grades and just sort of withering away at the schools are addressed in 2 other amendments that basically say that the towns have to decide to close their own. They can't be forced on it. They get to decide to close their own schools. And the 4th one, which actually I think is the first one, is leadership councils. It's to make that an amendment so that no board can change it. It would have to be changed by the entire community to get rid of leadership councils, which would be in each school made up of the principal, teachers selected by the teachers, parents and community members selected by them, and volunteers that want to serve. And where appropriate, where the students are old enough, have the students on those boards as well. There are other policies we're going to vote on tonight, so I think, so I'll leave those aside.
Yes, they are.
And
I think Tim's review was just the ones you discussed, not the ones that are coming up to be reviewed in general.
Right. So I'm not sure what else you can say about that. You have anything to add? You were there.
I do not have anything to add. Tara.
Hi, Tara Castine. I want to take this moment just to, I sent a few emails, so I'm sure you've all seen them. On the last board meeting, I asked, in the warranted meeting notes, it was addressed that you would be voting on a 4-2-2-2 configuration of the board. I had asked specifically when the vote took place, and I was told that if I looked for the vote, I would find it, which unfortunately, the only vote that you all placed for 4-2-2-2 was the warranting of that meeting. And the official vote for 4-2-2-2 of this board was never presented, voted, or commented on by the public. And I understand at this point in time it's warranted, so therefore that was your vote. But I'm, just as a Putney resident, kind of, I guess upset or not, just that there was no discussion, there was no, I couldn't see where each one of you voted in this thing. It was commented on 10-2 that the committee would bring forth a recommendation, and then on 10-16, which was the next meeting, it was just voted on as part of the warranting of the meeting, or the vote to happen within our towns. And I'm not really sure how to fix or how this is going to get fixed, but other than how, I don't, that's all I wanted to say, is that it was never officially voted on as part of its own discussion of this board, and I'm just upset as a town, a Putney resident, that we didn't have a chance to comment or to get all the options that were presented from the lawyer to the group.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion?
Is there a response to that comment?
The response, yeah, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, could you identify yourself?
Elizabeth Bissell, Putney, Vermont.
The answer would best be left to Christina, but we had a straw poll, and then we went back to the lawyer with the results of the straw poll, and this was the best compromise we were able to come up with, but we were basing it on what was a very informal vote.
And the straw poll was?
Among board members.
And the straw poll revealed?
revealed a strong preference for no strong preference. Like, it was really, there were very few positions that had more votes than other positions. There we go. I'm trying to find words for it.
Chair.
I'll just add one thing.
Vice Chair.
If the, we talked about this in the Policy and Amendments Committee for months, over and over and over, and we talked about it a lot in the board. When it came to the board, we just, as you said, we voted on the package of amendments. But it wasn't to keep from having that conversation, we just didn't think to do that.
Well,
And since obviously it matters, so I think in the future, we will think to do that.
it does matter, and the fact that we were told there was a vote, and when we looked for a vote, there was multiple references to tabled minutes, waiting for lawyer comments. If you review Robert Rules of Order, straw polls are actually out of order. They're not allowed on the broader sense of a board. So there's a couple different things that happened in this process that, as a voter who's really interested in the 4222 configuration, was an important discussion that should have happened.
I think, I agree, and I think if you ask any one of us, we would remember that we voted. I know we voted on that, we just didn't formally vote on it as a board, and that's correct. One thing, we use Robert's rules for small boards, Bob's rules, and we can have informal votes.
My book that I have, which is the most current one, states that the board can push it to a committee to discuss and bring back, but it doesn't reference small board, and on every other note it does say small boards can do this. So I would urge you to review that, make sure that you can actually do straw polls going forward.
Paul Norman, Demiston. I concur with the essence of what this young lady is talking about, because this was an important decision that's been made by the board, and without any discussion, open discussion on the board level that reached the public. And the fact that it was sort of done, it was done in committee based on a straw poll that did not indicate any particular preference of which way to go, and not giving the public a chance to weigh in on that decision. It doesn't lend itself, that kind of decision doesn't lend itself to transparency and encourage confidence on the part of the public.
Thank you. None of us had any intent of being anything less than transparent. Most of us are here based on a position in favor of transparency based on past actions of other people.
I understand. It just doesn't come across that way.
And we apologize.
Can I say something?
Of
Madam
course
Chair?
you can.
One time that the public will have input will be on November 19th. Because on November 19th, the Articles of Agreement that we have presented as a board will be voted on by 14,000 potential voters in the 4 towns.
It's not going to happen.
That's going to be the time.
Not going to happen.
So
14.
go to the polls and make your voice heard.
Next. All right. We're done here. The Programmatic and Performance Equity Committee. Emily, thank you.
So we met twice in the past 3 weeks, mostly to discuss field usage. So we were tasked with thinking about the equity amongst the teams and genders, and amongst levels of teams, so varsity versus JV. So that mostly will be presented when we talk about the turf conversation. We had a very brief discussion at the end about after-school care, which is still on our issue tracking sheet. We have a few different things on there, but it's kind of prime time. We're trying to look into what are the different after-school care options across the district, and Lyle has sent us a bunch of information that we still have to review. And not only what exists, but what are they doing, or which ones are academically focused versus, maybe in the extracurricular realm. And one thing that was brought up at the meeting was kind of food after school and snacks, and so we will be looking into a little bit of that, most likely at our next meeting, which is next week.
Anyone have any questions for Emily at this? Anybody have any questions for Emily at this time? Okay, moving on to the Climate Crisis Task Force.
Yeah, so the Climate Crisis Task Force met 2 weeks ago, I believe it was, with two things to talk about. One was to talk about the progress that we've made on a kind of long-term project where we assess what the school district, how it impacts or how it comes in contact with climate change. What we're doing that is beneficial, what there's room for change on. So that was one part. That's a kind of long-term process that requires a bit of research. The other part that we did was we were tasked with discussing how the proposed artificial turf would, what the impact would be on the environment. We didn't come up with an exact recommendation because we were still reviewing some new information, but our points were artificial turf is a heat collector made of fossil fuels. It needs to be replaced with a new field every 8 to 12 years in perpetuity. Grass takes in carbon and emits oxygen, and toxic chemicals will leach out during and after useful life of artificial turf. Those were our points that we came to in the meeting. And we should be meeting again in another 2 weeks.
Thanks, Tom. Does anyone have any questions for Tom right now? Okay. Communications Council, is there anyone here to? Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, Mr. Dimes.
Hi, Rick Dimes from Brattleboro. It's not clear to me when or if the public is allowed to comment on individual committee reports.
The public may comment, I'm sorry, I was looking out, they may comment, however, if it's specifically a discussion of the turf, that will come later in the agenda. So you might want to hold it off till then.
Thank you.
Do we have anyone here from the Communications Council who would like to communicate about your last meeting? Because Tim apparently is ill. Okay. I know that they sent out what was hopefully a reasonable explanation of the articles that will be on the ballot. But I saw another excellent explanation of them on the Brattleboro, Vermont Facebook page just today, so please feel free to look there. It's a very good explanation. Yes, Jay.
Jody Armado, Dummerston. I am concerned that the communications, it's only a couple of weeks away for the vote, and people throughout the area are very, very confused about what they are going to be voting on, because they don't understand the amendments from the study committee versus the default agreement, articles of agreement, versus what we're doing now. And they don't understand why or what. And so it really has to be very, very clear to people as to why they're voting and what they're voting on. And I hope the communications people will do that.
I have read a press release. Is it waiting final approval to be? It's waiting final approval to be sent out, but I have read a press release. Dave?
There were a couple things have been happening in this area, not surprisingly. One press release went out to all the media contacts that we're aware of, and the Communications Committee expanded that list. And another one is going to go out right after Veterans Day. Does that make sense? We also have, that's next month, that's Monday. We also have two public meetings scheduled, one in Dummerston on Tuesday night, I think it's the 15th, 14th? 13th, and Wednesday night here in the multi-purpose room at BAMS at 6 o'clock on Wednesday. The
14th is Thursday.
Is Thursday?
14th is Thursday.
And that's when we're here?
Yep.
Okay, so Wednesday the 13th is in Dummerston at 6, and Thursday the 14th is here in the multi-purpose room at the middle school, also at 6 o'clock. And what you saw on Facebook was part of Robin Werger's efforts to get it out through social media. So there will be more information coming. As far as the level of detail you talked about, we're not going to do that. We're getting information about the articles and asking people to vote them up or down.
And we will be seeking people to do the informational meetings from this
Yeah.
board. So,
Hopefully we all will.
yeah, Christina just has it on the agenda. Flipping between 3 pages now. The Diversity and Equity Committee. The Diversity and Equity Committee met on October 17th, just ahead of Attorney T.J. Donovan's forum for a hate-free Vermont. We had a report from the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Social Justice. They're studying how to implement ideas regarding equity and social justice across curriculums, and a study group is meeting. They're trying to get elementary school staff meetings, but they're kind of difficult to schedule, and they're visiting school leadership teams. They're planning Diversity Day and really looking forward to it. And the middle school students would like to hold Vermont Schools Against Racism conference here. So we are looking into that. We've been requested the opportunity to have some materials printed from our diversity office that can be taken to career fairs throughout New England by Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation. And it's a great opportunity, and we're looking forward to honesty. We discussed a lot of the challenges in trying to make systemic changes, but we're working on them. And we have an amendment, if you'll just stand by just a moment so I can get it out of my other file. We'd like to make a recommendation amending this board's decision to put the pride flag, the Philly pride flag in every town, and I can read it out. I move that the WSESD board direct the principals of all schools to organize the creation of a student design display, including the inclusion of all marginalized people in our schools. The design shall be approved by the school board, and the formulation of design shall preferably include the inclusive pride flag, which is a different flag than we talked about before. It includes a triangle in the corner representing trans and ACE folks. In the case of difficulty in settling on a design, or in the interest of time constraints, prominent display of that flag shall be considered a reasonable alternative. And we reiterate, the display and/or flag shall be located prominently in the main entrance area of the school, or at another location that shall allow it to be viewed by the majority of students, staff, family, and visitors to the school. The display and/or flag shall not be moved or blocked from view for any reason other than school maintenance without the express approval of the school board. And that is a motion that amends our last motion,
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays or abstentions? Seeing the ayes have it, the revised proposal is approved. I can email that to you when.
You read my mind, or my notes.
Yeah, good. There are a couple more things from the minutes about the diversity committee I wanted to
Sure,
mention,
please do,
since we've got a big audience. Aside from the work that the staff, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Social Justice are doing in the schools, there also are a lot of things going on getting students and the school community into other communities. There's a multicultural affairs group at UMass that is looking to partner with the middle school students to have an anti-racism conference here. The Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation is offered to include our materials at job fairs that they do. And we're looking at the materials that we developed last year with the Vermont Partnership to see if we can update and use them, or to create more. We're exploring internships and paraeducator options for college students to come of color to come into the schools. We exploring places to go for job fairs, and we're also, what's the other? Oh, and that they are working to develop aware groups in all the elementary schools. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. Okay. Now to find the next committee. Mission and Goals Committee, which I am not aware of the existence of.
Oh, no,
Would
that
Christina
was-
like to establish
that
one?
No, that one was to go through the committees and sort of understand, approve the missions and goals that they've established.
Ah, I see.
But we're not going to get to that tonight.
Okay, we are not. And
Goes to the next agenda.
the WSESU. That would normally be Christina, but perhaps one of the reps who was actually there would like to report back.
It wasn't there.
There wasn't.
It wasn't
but
there?
I can announce that there is a meeting scheduled on November 18, 5:30 in Vernon for WSESU.
Okay. And moving on, unless there is anything else from the committees, for the committees? Okay. And we're back to finances to approve
All right,
warrants. Sean?
I will read the warrants that we discussed, and so what I'm looking for, I'll just read the numbers and the amounts, and then we'll be looking for a motion and an approval. Warrants numbers: 1,080, 1,085, 1,088, 1,094, 1,096, in the amount of $171,467.27. Warrants number 1,093, 1,098, 1,100, and 1,101, in the amount of $128,385.66. Warrant number 1,102, in the amount of $315. Warrant number 1,104, 1,105, 1,106, 1,107, in the amount of $2,615,881.03. Warrants number 1,097, 1,103, 1,108, 1,110, in the amount of $162,733.15. Warrant numbers 1,109, 1,113, 1,114, 1,115, in the amount of $207,892.89. And warrant number 1,116 through 1,119, $97,841.87. And warrants number 1,112, 1,123, and 1,124, in the amount of $158,832.36. Warrants numbers 1,121, 1,122, 1,125, 1,126, 1,127, in the amount of $82,181.80. Payroll authorizations for September 27th, 2019, in the amount of $1,263,677.47. October 11th, my birthday, $1,266,064.95.
Happy birthday.
October 25th,
Bucks on your birthday.
$1,274,324.64.
Thank you, Sean. Do I hear, we have approved these in committee, but I'd like approval from the whole board, so do I hear a motion to approve all of the warrants that Sean so valiantly just read out?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Though I know we had long discussion earlier. Anybody? Okay. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? The ayes have it. The warrants are approved. Flipping back again to the revised. And it is now time for the administrative update.
So, a few things. We received word from the state about our lead testing dates. So beginning in December, mid-December through mid-January, all but Academy will have lead testing done at each site. A letter will go home to all families just talking about that and describing the exact dates and when. I have received a request. You may remember last time we approved Catherine Mason's request for resignation. She is asking you to, if she could rescind that letter of resignation and be reinstated, so that will be up to the board to decide.
I'd like to make a motion that we reconsider the resignation of Catherine Mason and reinstate her position at Oak Grove.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? The ayes have it. Welcome back, Ms. Mason.
Thank you. In the last board meeting, you had directed me to look at a Title IX assessment. We contacted a few people and found that it could be quite expensive. We're going to start with a self-assessment while we look around and do some more research to see if we can find someone that can come in and do the assessment for a reasonable cost. We will eventually, but it is, hiring someone is not going to be our first step. We're going to work on a self-assessment first. As I said earlier, WSESU meeting in Vernon, November 18th, 5:30. I'm trying to set up meetings with each legacy board, so if you were on a legacy board or if you're in the audience tonight, your former board chair is trying to contact you to set up a meeting for November 14. The only thing on the agenda is property transfer. So starting at 5 o'clock and then every half hour, I've tried to schedule boards. Our attorney, Mark Ottinger, would be available to us that evening, and that would happen here. And we need to warn those no later than Tuesday, so please be in touch with the former board chair if you have not heard yet. And then I have one executive session, attorney-client relations.
Okay. And I believe we are moving on to unfinished business. Oh boy, this is where Christina's flipping back and forth gets a little confusing. But we have an adoption of F-35, the school animal policy, which I should have on a different agenda. So, everybody's familiar with the animal policy? Do I hear a motion to approve policy F-35?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Can I have a question?
We discuss after we have a motion and a second.
Second.
Yes, thank you. Any discussion?
I know I've asked this before, Jody Normandeau from Dummerston, but I'm still concerned with the policy talking about, well, I know in Dummerston they have chicks that they raise, and I know that the other animals are raised or been in here for the science. And I just want to make really sure that under the guidelines for other animals, where it says each principal shall determine whether they're okay, that they have the sole authority, and not this policy or not the board, to allow the certain animals that are following here. Is that the case?
The principals have the policy, but have the sole authority, but with any policy, if there's a problem, this board is able to intervene.
If there's a problem.
Yeah, if there's a
But
problem.
I hate to see some of the things that are happening in all the schools disappear because of one policy covering everybody.
So would I.
Yeah, I know, and
That's what we work to avoid in tracking
Yeah.
this one.
So I just want to be assured that some of these things can still happen.
Mark Younger, Brattleboro. When are we going to discuss, what time is this artificial turf going to happen? Because I've been up since 4:30, working till 5, and I got here late, and I'm wondering, when is this going to happen?
This is rescheduled to come
Now, you
almost
said
at the
earlier,
end.
you said that we're waiting for somebody to be involved in this.
We're waiting for the chair of this board to
Why are we
return
waiting?
because it was requested by the chair and she sets the agenda.
So we have to do everything to her will?
We decided to do it this way.
Yes,
I'm
we,
asking her that question.
right, because she made the request, and in light of the fact that she's putting 40 to 50 hours a week, asking for half an hour to go to her kid's induction into the National Honor Society is not much to ask.
So do you have an answer for me what time that's going to
No,
happen?
I do not, because we have other agenda items to get through. I don't know.
So she didn't tell you when she's coming?
She actually planned this out as carefully as she could manage
Which
to
was?
allow her to come back. I don't know, I'd have to sit here and add up all the numbers. I have this calculator, that'll take 45 minutes. I would remind the public that personal attacks are not in order.
This is not an attack. I've been working all day, and I'm just trying to get my say in what's gonna happen here. And I've been going for over 12 hours, and I gotta get up at 4 o'clock again, and I'm asking you when this was gonna start, and you cannot tell me because we're waiting for somebody. That's all I'm saying.
No, I can't answer you because it was moved on the agenda and we have an agenda to get through. If we get through this agenda and Ms. Naylor is not here yet, I will begin.
Okay, you didn't say that before, though. You said you were waiting for her to come.
Because she specifically requested it.
I
That's
hear
why
you.
we
I hear you
rearranged.
totally.
Okay then. Now then, where were we? Animals?
Animal policy.
Yes,
We have a
Ellen.
motion on the table.
We have and
second.
we're discussing, and I just have a person who'd like to discuss.
I just wonder if we have a copy that we can see of what the policy is that you're talking about?
Printed, no, but on the SU, yeah, it's on the SU website. Okay, Jody has one to share with you.
Okay. Any further discussion of the animal policy at this point?
Elizabeth Honey, I have a hypothetical question. If the principal ultimately gets to call for the school, correct? You know, to say whether or not the policy that's happening for that individual school is what's what, unless there's a problem.
No, that's other animals. We have specific policies for some of the animals, including dogs, if that's what you're asking.
Oh, so the dogs and sort of standard animals have a different policy? I'm just not sure.
Dogs have a separate policy,
Okay.
and then
And
there are...
if there were a problem, so it's, I'm sorry. All right, well, I'm just gonna read it then and
That's
see what
a good
it
idea.
says.
That's a good idea. All in favor?
So, wait, I
Okay,
do have
see,
a
if they're not
question.
done, she had a question.
Okay, so certified dogs have to be, they all have to be certified. If a dog is coming into the school, they need to be certified as,
Yes.
and who checks the certification?
Christina found a particular certification that is approved by the AKC,
And she has that information, and I have it, but again, it's buried very deeply.
Okay, so
there-
at a particular school, if there were an issue, the question would be posed to see the dog certification then, right?
We would need to see the dog certification anyway. We cannot be reactive to things like animal bites. We have to be proactive.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Liz?
It's Liz Adams, buddy. It's the AKC good citizenship test that they have to pass. And then there's a plus on that for the kids. So it's like a two-part thing.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, Tara, sorry.
Tara Castine, Putney. who will be keeping the certifications for the pets and the dogs? Will that be a school responsibility or a district responsibility for pets allowed on site?
That hasn't been considered. As far as I know, I would assume that the district would be responsible for keeping those records. Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Would the ayes have it, the policy is passed. I'm sorry, I'm not clear on what Christina has typed here. H7 leadership councils.
We need to table that.
We need to table that for next time?
The language in the policy didn't get changed when we changed it for the amendments. So the language in the policy and the language in the amendments are different. So the amendment actually would be passed before we have the policy, even though we wanted to have the policy before the amendment was passed. So we need to table it and make the changes and then present it again.
All right, well, we don't have Tim here to review the first readings of our next three policies. Has everyone read them? The public participation in board meetings, tobacco prohibition, and freedom of expression. Okay, this can be considered a first reading. They will not be passed without further discussion, but we have to read them 3 times before we can make any kind of motion.
And they're on the website if anybody wants to see what they say.
Where are they on the website?
Under the school boards.
All right, I'm flipping back again. Yes, Jim?
Are they going to be read today, tonight?
No.
No, we don't usually read them out loud.
Because I have one comment on the public.
Oh, then please do.
My only comment, I thought it was pretty well written, but my only one comment is where it says public input, like Jody Normandeau, Dummerston, where it says public input on items not on the agenda, there will be time set aside. And I'm only concerned with people who might come with something to say that's not on the agenda, that's elderly and wants to go to bed early, or there's a parent that needs to take care of a child, and that they might have to be pushed off till the end of the meeting. So I would just suggest that it would be in a timely fashion. Like it's been in the past, it's been in front of the agenda. So they don't have to stay 4 hours for the meeting to get to have their say.
I agree with that. I would hope that people like that would contact the board chair ahead of time and make a specific request for such a thing, because that's not unreasonable at all, what you're suggesting.
A lot of people might not know that they can request it, so.
You can always ask. Hello, Christina. And I believe, Lyle, you have a leadership
very
council
quick.
update?
So we have 2 schools that have set dates for leadership councils, and the other schools are still looking for people that are interested in being on leadership councils. So if you're interested in being on the leadership council at a school, contact your building principal. You are to write a letter of interest that includes why you might be interested and what you might be able to bring to the leadership council. It should, we're encouraging parents, community members, there will be teachers, and a board member will be also joining.
When will we be assigned to leadership councils? Is that in the future? I'm sorry to bombard you.
Now I know where we are. Okay, great, thank you, sorry about that. I think we're waiting till they form, so
So we have 2 meetings scheduled, one on the 21st and one on the 22nd.
Yeah, wow, that's awesome.
So Putney on the 21st and Guilford on the 22nd. So if you want to do that sooner rather than later, that would be great.
Putney on the 21st and Guilford on the 22nd. So is there, before we make any decisions on this, I'll recognize Jamie Comtois.
Hi, thank you, Jamie Comtois from Putney. There's a group of us in Putney that submitted our letters for the Leadership Council. We're really excited to get going. One of the challenges I have is that the date was set without consulting with any of the people who submitted letters. And so I sit on another committee that's being started by the town of Putney, and they set around a doodle poll, and we set the date collaboratively so that the majority of the people who wanted to participate could participate. So I just wanted to connect with, that's a process we've used at town level, and I just wondered if we could use that for Leadership Council so that those of us who submitted letters can actually participate.
That sounds like a great process going forward for people, and I know the administrators have a lot of afternoons already booked, so that will make the doodle poll smaller to do that. But
So I'll put that on the agenda for their first meeting.
excellent. Thanks for the suggestion, Jerry. Yes.
There was a comment made by members of the public that they would like to go to the meat of the meeting, which is the turf field discussion.
Okay.
So
we're
right there.
That's next.
I'm Leslie Krasny, Brattleboro. I'm assuming that's going to be a very long and complicated discussion, the turf discussion. And I wonder if I could make my presentation first, because mine will be short.
What is the will of the board? No, we haven't finished Leadership Council yet, so why don't we finish that item out, and then we'll go back to that. Because we still have to assign people to Putney and Guilford. Is there anybody interested in taking the first Putney?
So can I ask a question first?
Sure, yeah.
So are we having a strategy where, because I can picture multiple strategies. One is like there's a standing board member at the meeting so that we really know the schools. Another strategy is to have rotating board members. Should the board members be from a community other than, like, to familiarize themselves with the school, like, or we just gonna go random? I mean, all the ways are fine. I'm just wondering, is there a preference, or do we want to just piecemeal right now and figure out next time?
Why don't we piecemeal it for now, because because it may be somebody wants to do Putney, because these dates are now set, and we have pretty full schedules on this board, so it would be just nice to get a member of the board going there. And then we've talked, both options have been spoken about. One is that we could, one option was that we would have a standing member, and one is that people would rotate through all the time to have understanding of the schools, because many of us don't, sometimes it was people's first time in one of the schools and we've had a meeting there. So I think we should probably decide that as a board and figure out what works for people. We had also talked about having maybe two, one that's a standing, one that's a rotating, but we need some more bodies because we have 10 leadership councils and 8 of us. So that means that would be 20 meetings for 8 people. You do the math based on all the other meetings we're doing. So maybe that's a goal for when we have 10 members that we could look at that. But let's just try to piecemeal it in so there is some conduit from these people that have done the hard work of getting these leadership councils going, is my thought. Does anybody else have a different take on that idea? Before we finish this out, I'll recognize Tara.
Sorry, Tara Cassine, Putney. 2 questions. One is, how are the people on the leadership committees being selected by the board or by the principal? And 2, how is the notification going out to those people? And 3, it would be really great if we could plan a non-work hour time for said committees so that people who really have an interest could attend. That's it. Thank you.
So I can answer. Anybody that's asked is on it because we've had so few people, except for Putney. The first meeting is at 4 o'clock, which was, we hoped, a compromise between work time and teachers having to stay into the evening. At that first meeting, they, as Jamie just suggested, we could do a doodle poll, we can talk about time. But if we want to have representation from teachers, we probably can't have it in the evening. We can probably never have it in the evening if we're going to have students there for any, unless their parents are going to be willing to bring them back for some reason. So at this point, anyone that's had sent a letter is considered on. I've been making that determination just because there are so few people. And the other question, there will be a notice sent to anyone that's interested when the first meeting is.
I think ultimately we have to appoint the people, so those names should probably come before us for appointment as
Do
they
that
come
right
through, because that's what we're, although the policy hasn't been implemented yet,
Nope.
nor has the amendment passed yet, but might as well just follow the process that we've laid out.
Send those to you tomorrow.
Thank you. Back up to the question at hand. Anybody able to make Putney or on the 21st or Guilford on the 22nd?
I can do Putney.
Okay, so Ann's taking Putney. 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock for Putney, 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock? Sure. It's 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock for Guilford, I'm sorry.
Was that a volunteering? Kelly? Oh, you can't do 1 o'clock, right? Well, if.
What time is the meeting in Guilford?
1 o'clock,
I think it's
sorry.
1 o'clock.
I can do that.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for stepping up, folks. Does that cover leadership councils? Excellent. Mr. Norman Dow.
Paul Norman, Dummerston. I'm listening to this conversation about wanting to get people involved in the leadership councils, and you're making meetings at 1 o'clock, 4 o'clock. I mean, working hours are generally, till 5, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And if you want to get participation, and the logic that Lyle put forth was that teachers, if you want to have a teacher, the citizens of are contributing their time to this endeavor. I would think if a teacher wanted to be on the leadership council, he or she could make time in the evening as much as a regular citizen could. I just don't understand the logic.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we're feeling our way through this. We really have no idea how it should work out or how exactly it should be structured, and everyone is going to be different, and that's good because all the schools are different. And those considerations are going to come in. If people come and want it, and they need to have it later, then that committee, that leadership council will try and find ways to work around that. We can't set a definitive policy and say they have to be at 7 o'clock or they have to be at 1 o'clock or anything. We have to just let it unfold, see what's working in these schools. To try and direct it from the top down, we guarantee that it won't work.
I hope it works and you get participants.
If it doesn't, we'll change. We'll do something different.
Okay,
But we've got to do something if we want to make any progress at all.
I don't want to have it back and forth.
Thank you.
Yes.
So how many folks have volunteered from Guilford and how many from Putney? 3 community residents?
3 from Guilford,
Parents, okay.
4 or 5 from Putney.
And then how many teachers?
The Putney, they're using their leadership team, and leadership team meets from 3 to 4, and then they were going to stay on from 4 to 5.
Okay.
Yep.
And Guilford?
Guilford, there are no teachers yet. They were going to do it at 1 o'clock for their first meeting because we could cover somebody to come in and join the meeting for that day.
Oh.
And it's also the day before a long week, vacation week for students, so to get started and get it off the ground, they wanted to just get it going.
Can all the, you might not know, but can all the people, the community representatives in Guilford make that?
I
So I just
know
wondering
that the people that have sent letters have all agreed to that.
Okay, Brattleboro and Dummerston, you got to get your leadership councils. And Guilford have thrown down the gauntlet. Jamie, I think you've already spoken to leadership councils, so if I call on everybody twice, I'm going to be we're going to be here till midnight. Yes, I'm sorry.
Kurt Dimes from Brattleboro. I would like to follow up on Mr. Norman Doe's sentiments about participation. The board I appreciate David's candor about, figuring things out. The board missed a beat in representation. Brattleboro has recently approved a charter amendment to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. My organization promoted that. Brattleboro Common Sense promoted that for the sake of greater participation in government. And one of the provisions of this was that 16 and 17-year-olds would also serve on the school board. And I think it's been overlooked. It's an important thing, I think, for engendering participation among younger people. not just in town, in the limited sense of town government, but also maybe especially in the school board.
I will just, not to have it back and forth, but we are going to have student council representatives sitting in our meetings on a regular basis as sort of a way to have the student voice heard at the table and try to figure out, I think it's on our agenda tonight towards the end, if we're still awake by then, to figure out a way that we can increase student input from that particular demographic. So I appreciate your input.
Thank you.
Very quickly, Ruby McAdoo from Putney. So 4 of the 5 people from Putney are here and didn't know about the meeting. And so the question I have is who is going to be communicating? And I understand you guys are rolling with it, but it's fairly important that we make sure that everybody who is going to be on it knows, even if they don't have a choice in this first meeting's time.
So I'm going to maybe ask that you direct that question to her directly, who's sort of putting it together at the Putney level, because I don't know what every principal is doing at every moment. So that might be an easier way to resolve it. If you haven't heard back, also, you know, I sent an email out to my legacy board members and nothing came back because none of them checked that email anymore. So you know, stuff happens. So if you could just check with her, that would be awesome. Moving off of leadership councils, am I correct? Everything's been taken care of on that. Excellent. So we have a request from a member of the public to change the, move the auditorium up 2 points, which I estimate should be about a 5-minute discussion before the turf field discussion. Is there any concern about doing that on the board's part? Okay, then we will go to item C, auditorium naming discussion. And I will turn the request over to Leslie Kramsky. Would you like me to do some background or no? Are you good to go?
Go ahead.
We've had a request to have a naming of the auditorium in honor of Robert Kramsky, who's taught here for 46 years and runs some fabulous productions. And it's your last chance, folks. So this February will be his last run at the BUHS production. And on the last night, we've had a lot of community interest in having not missing that opportunity to be able to name that auditorium that night when his students will be there. It'll be his last night. It has been our policy not to name something officially until after that person has retired. And sadly, Mr. Kramsky will be retiring as of June 30th. So our hope is to consider naming the auditorium effective July 1, 2020, but that the announcement of this could be made during the last performance of the BUHS production.
So moved.
So moved. Oh, I've already got a movement. Okay, well, we'll get the motion on the table. Get the motion on the table. Thank you, Sean. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Oh, many seconds for that one, but I'm giving it to Thomas. And is there any board discussion on this? Is there any public comment on this?
The only thing I would change is rather than the last performance, it would be the Friday night performance.
Right.
We amend the amendment, or amend the motion to?
Yes, we should amend that. I will. You can amend. Why don't you amend it?
I move we amend the motion to Friday night rather than the final performance.
Is there a second on that motion?
Second.
All those in favor of the motion to amend?
Aye.
Nays abstention? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion now would be to announce the naming effective July 1, 2020 of the Kramsky Auditorium on the Friday night performance of the BUHS musical production. Any other public comment? All those in favor of the motion to name the Kramsky Auditorium effective July 1, 2020, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays, abstentions? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Come July 1, we will have a new name for the auditorium. Get your tickets now, folks. Get your tickets now. Going back to the turf field discussion. everybody gotten, so I sent the emails of health stuff, I believe PPE sent along sort of the different field needs. Anybody need a copy of this? Did you get that, Thomas?
We got it now.
Okay, oh great.
Got them looking over it.
Uh,
Put it on the screen when you're ready.
oh, excellent, excellent. You guys are so prepared. And what else? Finance Committee has some thoughts. I unfortunately had to leave early, so I might have to turn that piece over to you, Sean, to discuss.
I touched on it a little bit in the Finance Committee report. Actually, now that I have the opportunity, I would also like to say that I missed a report. We did have 2 Finance Committee meetings in addition to the one tonight. We had one on the 29th of October and one on the 31st of October. Unfortunately, partially due to my error, the 31st was not as productive as we had hoped. And the Finance Committee tonight, we were discussing about the possibility of a turf field. We're also talking with the administration, and Frank Rucker had some comments. And as everybody knows, it's been an extremely contentious subject. There's been so many people who feel so passionately about it, either one way or the other. So we initially had hoped to bring a Finance Committee recommendation, or at least a report to this board, the WSESD, but we failed to do that tonight. And we did have some suggestions. One of the things that we brought up was that if we do not go forward with an RFQ or an RFP, that there's a possibility that it will be status quo for next year if this board cannot, vote and come to some kind of a consensus. That was one possibility. Another possibility would be to actually say it's time for public input, take the final decision-making process out of the hands of the WSESD board and put it totally on the population of the 4 towns, the potential voting population of 14,000 people. That would be a possibility. Another possibility is to not send out an RFQ and an RFP and hire an engineering firm for a substantial sum to do a review of all the fields on the BUHS campus. So that's another possibility. So right now, because of the flux of so much public opinion, so much board diversity of opinion, so much unknown, so much speculation, that we're kind of stuck in Vermont mud in the spring. So what we do from here, I think, I don't know if it'll be decided tonight, but the Finance Committee, that's where we ended our meeting tonight.
So I should probably back up. Emily has pointed out to me, wait a minute, everybody might not have stayed tuned for all brilliant 3.5 hours of our last meeting. Different committees were taking a look at different parts, and the charge of the Finance Committee was to take a look at just trying to clarify the costs of the various options, understanding that they are estimates, and my thanks to Chris Sawyer for working tirelessly to try to answer my questions. My questions, trying to nail down the costs and providing us with a lot of good data from other districts that have done this. The Climate Crisis Committee was working on the environmental aspects of it, of the field, because there's discussion about, well, you don't have to use synthetic fertilizer, and sort of taking a look at that. The Equity Committee was looking at field access, I think with a special eye towards Title IX and assuring that women's athletic teams had access and kind of taking inventory of where we are right now so that the board could have a better understanding of the challenges for field access. And an ad hoc committee of two had a fun weekend reading a lot of the research and interpreting a lot of the research on the various health aspects, such as they are, various medical studies out there on artificial turf. So Sean gave a presentation of the Finance Committee. We do have a document from Chris Sawyer that gives us some idea of costs just on the turf. Does everybody have a copy of that for the minutes from Finance? So there is some guidance there. Maybe not quite where we needed to get to, but it's a good starting point anyway. Is there another committee that would like to?
Excuse me?
Yes.
I've been holding my hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, generally we have board discussion first, and then we take public comment. So.
Okay, is that how it works here?
Yeah. Generally, we let the board discuss and go through.
We had a whole meeting of conversation.
Sorry?
We had a whole meeting of public input.
Right, we had a meeting last time that everybody could give public comment first, and all we did was take public comment. We will take public comment before taking any action, but we haven't really gotten a chance to talk to you about this as a board. Actually,
Well, I have one question. I don't understand. Why aren't you putting this to the general public for an entire vote, up or down? Because he just said there's so many people back and forth, for it or against it. Why isn't it going to the general public for one big vote and having whoever have the dollar amount and boom, it's out there?
This is one of the, so.
It's already been voted on.
So this is one of the discussions.
Where?
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Not public.
So, excuse me, you can't talk back and forth, Liz, Mark, you can't talk back and
Bang
forth.
the table with?
So, yeah, I don't have a gavel, darn it. Budget cuts. So, that's one of the options. Somebody in the community called me, and that was a suggestion I brought to the Finance Committee. This is the first opportunity we as a board have to consider that. So that's one of the options that we're going to be talking about. So
why are we?
I can't do it back and forth because I really want to get.
Point of order. Point of order.
Yes, point of order.
Madam Chairman, perhaps Mr. Younger could speak. We could amend the rules for a moment. Mr. Younger could speak and go home and get some rest.
Yeah, I've been up since 4:30.
And we could all have some procedural relief.
I'm just concerned about so we haven't had a chance to talk about that as a board, and the board has asked for all these reports to be done to help make a decision, and this is one of the options on the table, is to bring it to the public for a full vote for an athletic turf field. So if the board wants to take public comment before we have discussion, so we can have an unabrogated discussion as a board, I will entertain that motion.
Considering the circumstances of this gentleman, I think it might be, if he makes it brief, I'd be willing to hear it.
Do I have a second on that?
Yeah, one person.
Okay, so we're going to suspend the rules for this. All those in favor of this?
Aye.
Any extensions as we have? We are allowing one person to speak. Everybody had 2 minutes.
And maybe a time limit.
Yeah, I will only be a couple minutes. Mark Younger, Brattleboro, Vermont. I was listening to what he just said. To me, it doesn't make sense if you're gonna think about spending money on a survey and then not know what the total cost of everything is, and what I think it's an 8-year down the road, another cost that you're gonna put the entire community and the dollar amount that, I look at that and I'm like, why aren't you putting it just, instead of the board, putting it right out to the public to vote on it on such and such a day, up or down, for you guys don't have to worry about this. You don't have to worry about the big discussion. Put it out to the general public and make them decide themselves on the whole thing. And that way, your hands are washed, nice and clean. And the dollar amount I've heard was $1.2 million, and we only have a certain amount in funds put aside, and the rest would have to be borrowed or gotten from some other place, and then 8 years down the road, it's gonna be another additional cost. I don't understand it. I can't fathom the cost that we're gonna spend on this when we could just have grass for the 600,000 or 700,000 we have in escrow, we could put brand new turf on the whole darn field for how many years? You know, it does not make any sense. And the taxpayers and people who pay rent in this town, their costs are keep going up because things like this, it adds to the total cost. Meaning, one person's paying $1,000, the next year he's paying $1,025, and the next year it keeps going up. And Brattleboro as a whole is costing too much money for stuff. And it just doesn't add up to me. And I don't understand this. Why isn't it just a big vote? One vote. Go ahead.
What I'll hold, after 2 minutes, I'll just hold up.
No,
It's 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Younger. Back to the presentation. Does PPE want to go over there? You guys ready to do your?
And we'll just plug in.
No, I'm the woman.
You might have to give a scroll or two.
Before we get going on this, could I ask a question? Sure. I was just wondering where the data was generated in order to make this. Was it from the Chris Sawyer or the athletic department?
So I'll start by prefacing it while she's getting it up so everybody can see, because we didn't print off enough for everybody. So Chris sent us tons of data, so I don't know where he is right now, but thank you, Chris, for all that. It allowed us to kind of data dive. Thank you. So a lot of data on the demographics for the sports, the amount of participation in each sports across a few years, where each sports team was practicing, where each sports team was playing, schedules for the sports teams, how long practices were, I mean, a lot of stuff. So what we tried to do on the equity committee was figure out what should we do with this, because it was a little overwhelming. So once the charts are up, I can kind of walk us through. We were mainly tasked, we kind of went big picture at first, but then we thought a little bit about more, okay, the board has tasked us with thinking about equity and access, not coming up with tons of solutions like voting and everything. I mean, we were really tasked with something specific, so we tried to stay true to that.
This is the whole packet. That's what's in here.
Yep. Okay, so some of the first stuff that we came up with was just looking at simple demographics, like who is playing what sport. And then we'll go into a little bit more field use. We have a lot of charts for folks. Will you be able to flip through as we go?
Yeah, you might have to prompt me, but
okay.
sure.
So first is the demographics. So just looking specifically, we were tasked to look at Title IX, so that's gender equity. Although we did look at levels, so JV versus varsity, where are they playing, and then also access to different things like bleachers, bathrooms, lights, all these things. So the first two charts are on athletes by gender. So this is just for fall. It doesn't include cross country. We didn't have a number on that. So it's only for soccer, field hockey, and football. So you can see that there are 85 females versus 110 males. And then you can see the breakdown by sport. So when we look at the sports, 55 boys soccer players, that's on varsity, JV, and JV. So 3 teams. Same thing for girls. Field hockey is 2 teams. Only girls play field hockey. Well, not only girls play field hockey, but in our district, it's primarily a female sport. And then football has 55, and that is just JV and varsity. You'll have to flip through. So after looking at that, we went into field use by athletes in autumn co-curricular, and we did this overall at first, not breaking it down by gender, just to see what the distribution was. So we have 28% of fall athletes play game on regulation fields with lights, bleachers, and facilities nearby. Unfortunately, but one thing that we, I think a lot of people already know, but it's good to take account of, is that's only actually boys football who has that. And it's Natowich Field, the field that we're actually looking at right now. 34% of athletes play games on non-reg fields with lights, limited bleachers, and facilities nearby, ish. And those were the field hockey teams, the varsity girls, and boys soccer. So varsity and varsity boys. And then 38% of fall athletes play games on regulation-sized fields with no lights, limited bleachers, and limited facilities. Those are actually mainly JV teams. So we realized that actually the JV, and if any of this, strikes the administration as incorrect, because I know you guys are dealing with a lot of the data, just please ask a question. Anybody can ask a question, really. So we actually realized that regulation size fields the JV teams are playing in regulation size fields, which was surprising to us. We didn't know that the varsities were struggling with the regulation size fields, but they had lights. The JV have regulation size. So it's just something to note because it gives us a few options if we decide not to just look at Natowich. So then we have the next chart, which splits 2 pages, unfortunately, but we can just go to the chart. Oh, good, up there. So then we tried to break it down by gender. When we just broke it down by gender, it was a little jarring because it didn't take into account that it's really just the football field making up the difference in gender. So if we look at this, we have 50% of male athletes play in regulation fields with lights and bleachers, and 50% of male athletes are the football team. I mean, it's a massive team. So 17% of male athletes play in non-reg fields with lights. This is pretty much the soccer team, the varsity boys. And 33% play on the reg fields with no lights, limited bleachers, and limited bathrooms. It's the JV. On the female side, we have 0% of female athletes play on a regulation field with lights and bleachers and facility nearby. So that's a pretty big difference. Now, one thing we had brainstormed too, or just talked about, was like actually if the female, like the field hockey team, for example, was playing on a regulation field with lights, then it would kind of make up that difference because it's a male-only sport football, female-only field hockey. It's not a suggestion, it's just those tend to be the gender difference in our district. 57% of female athletes play on non-reg fields with lights, limited bleachers, and facilities nearby. This is the varsity girls soccer, and additionally the varsity and JV field hockey. And then 43% of female athletes play on regulation fields with no lights and limited bleachers and limited bathrooms. These are the folks who are playing on over at Sawyer and the other field. Fort Dummer, yeah. Moving on. We did it by level too. So it's actually something that was brought up on the committee, even though we were tasked to look specifically at gender, there is also differences in levels of play. And that's actually, up to the community really to decide we've given priority in some cases to varsity sports, assuming that everybody will kind of get their chance to play a varsity sport. But it is a question for the community whether or not we feel it's important to, have equity amongst all teams. 35% of varsity athletes play in regulation fields, 65 varsity athletes play in non-reg fields. We've kind of already looked a little bit at that. And 0 varsity athletes play in reg fields with limited bleachers, no lights, and no facilities. This number might actually be incorrect because we have the football team. So noted, and we will change that. So the varsity boys football team would be playing on a reg field. Oh no, sorry, that's the top number. 35% of varsity athletes play in regulation fields. They have lights. It was interesting to note that there's 79 varsity athletes compared to about 116 non-varsity athletes. So it's actually a lot larger of a set because they have JV, B, and JV. So just a note that when we prioritize varsity, a lot of people are playing on those fields that aren't, maybe they don't have bleachers, nobody can sit and watch them. So on non-varsity side, we have 24% of non-varsity fall athletes play in regulation fields with lights. 13% of non-varsity, and that would be the field hockey team, JV field hockey. 13% and football. 13% of non-varsity fall athletes play in non-reg fields with lights, and 63% of non-varsity fall athletes play on the regulation fields with the limited bleachers, no lights, and no facilities nearby. You can see how we broke down by team. It's not an exact science. We kind of just divided up the numbers we were given. Granted, one JVB team might be bigger than the other, but we didn't get into that. We just kind of did an average. The last page on here, and then I'll just summarize. Projected use of Natowich Field. So this is what was projected, or what was...
Shift the, can you change the slide?
This is the change slide.
Okay.
So 52%. So this was just the breakdown in who was expected to use this field if we were putting artificial turf. It doesn't mean I guess if we were putting grass turf, this wouldn't be the same because we have the issue of specifically field use around the grass. 52% would be football because they'd have also the JV team playing on it for all their games. 25% would be field hockey, varsity and JV. So they'd still have, at least they'd be on a regulation size field in that case. 11% varsity girls soccer and 11% varsity boys. I put the varsity girls in here. Actually, there was a question because it wasn't listed that varsity girls would actually play on this field. I put it on here assuming it was a mistake in the packet, but that's still the question if the varsity girls soccer would be playing on there. I don't know. And this is overall numbers, so of all the varsity girls soccer. JV boys and girls soccer and middle school teams would still use the regulation fields with limited bleachers, no lights and no facilities nearby, likely, or maybe they could switch to the non-reg field with lights, but it's not regulation size, so I'm not sure what would go on there. Spring information is incomplete at this time, but we did talk about it on the committee. All softball games would still be played on fields requiring construction of facilities, seating, and lights to align with that offered by boys baseball. So right now, as many folks know, Tenney Field is lighted, Sawyer Field is not. And I'm gonna hurry it up here. The overview that we had was football skewed the stats a little bit, more towards gender in the male side of having a little bit more access to things. And JV, not surprisingly, has less amenities in their fields. In spring sport, we did come up with and in spring sports, we were a little concerned when we looked at it, although we didn't get to present the data, that there was some access inequities. And one thing that was mentioned on our committee, we're not necessarily here to offer recommendations, but we'll just say a few. We are concerned about Sawyer Field. Sawyer Field is a regulation soccer field not being used by varsity athletes. And there isn't another option if we wanted to increase access for that and putting lights there, and then it would have a lighted softball field, which would make it more equitable with the boys baseball, bleachers and a bathroom. So you'd have that regulation soccer field as well as more equity for the girls in softball. They had bleachers too, people could go enjoy their games. So it strikes me as that was kind of one of the things we talked about, many different things, the Tenney grandstands and just a lot of stuff. I won't go into all of it, but I think one thing that just came out was like, there may be interest in broadening the conversation if we were thinking about equity. Good?
Thank you. What nice charts and graphs with circles on the arrows and that. It's going to put the ad hoc health committee to shame. That would be me. So equity, I guess I will give a broad brush. You all got my, and Thomas helped me with this, the long sort of explanation. So there's a lot of different areas of concern with artificial turf that have come up over time. One of the issues is heavy metal exposure. So let me step back. Artificial turf, the kind that we're looking at particularly, is plastic blades that look like grass, and then there's some infill to cushion it and to help that grass stay standing up straight. And the fill of choice, the fill that's predominantly used now is crumb rubber, which is tires that are either frozen and shattered or ground up that would have been landfilled or whatever. It's a way to recycle tires, and you spread this out, and so whatever was in those tires is in the crumb rubber infill. So that has been the cause. If you Google crumb rubber infill, you will get many, many hits. There's been some concern about that. One of the concerns has been heavy metal exposure. There's been a lot of work done on this, and then pretty recently it was found that all the results people got change when you heat the crumb rubber to 60 degrees Celsius, which is like 150 Fahrenheit or so. And so those tests are now being redone, and it's one of the reasons why the EPA, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, and the Consumer Product Safety Commission is in the middle of a large study looking at all these things, trying to fill in all the gaps, and that study has not been completed yet. So we're kind of in the middle. We're trying to look at what there is for data and really waiting for this very, very large scale. They did the first gap analysis of the data that they still need, and now they're going forward, and they've done part 1 of the study. Part 2 is coming out sometime. neither of these are a risk assessment, they're just looking at the materials in there. But some of the things they've found is that there is zinc and lead in crumb rubber. Lead is the one that we'd be most concerned about for our students. I think if we are going forward with crumb rubber, we really should, and Chris has mentioned you can get a certification that the crumb rubber would be lead-free. Windham County's been identified as an area of high lead concern for the state by the EPA, so that would be our recommendation on that. If we were going forward with crumb rubber, it should be lead-free for our students. Zinc, I think, is more of a concern for aquatic life. So that would be a concern for if it leached out into the water and went into the Connecticut River. That's where the zinc would be of concern. There are carcinogens in crumb rubber, and I think it's important to note that crumb rubber varies from time to time. So it depends on what is in the tires that got ground up, maybe from where in the country the tires came from, who made them. There has been no long-term study on that has, there's been one study in Washington State that with soccer goalies, because the goalies are likely to put their face into it and get more exposure. And there was no, it was not a super large-scale study, it wasn't a long-term study, it wasn't an epidemiological study, but that study indicated that there was no difference in the cancer rate of soccer goalies in Washington State than the general population. That said, there are many carcinogens in the crumb rubber, and the EPA, CDC, and CPSC is studying the amount of exposure and how these toxins are leached. The one area that we do have epidemiological data, the gold standard of data for medical research, is the risk of lower leg injuries. And so when you look at the overall injury rate on turf versus grass, it's the same with the exception of lower leg injuries, so ACL, knee injuries, things like that. The thought is that that the grass part is stickier, so athletes are turning, especially in football, if they're turning, they're more likely to strain because the synthetic turf doesn't give up on a cleat the way natural grass would. And the injury increase was between 16 and 24%. And it appeared from the research in Division II football players that the younger, less experienced players had a higher rate of lower leg injuries. So that's the only significant difference, but that is a significant difference for students, because an ACL is not a good, an ACL or a knee injury in a student is not a great thing to have. It seemed to be more prevalent in football than soccer too, based on our research. Would that be? The other area we looked at was MRSA infections, because turf has more friction, as I noted earlier. It's more likely to give turf burns. And so the concern is that MRSA is in locker rooms, it's everywhere. And so it's a concern. There's not been any large-scale studies on MRSA. There was one study in Connecticut of an outbreak of MRSA, and they looked where many players had it, so it was a great opportunity to look what happened in this one situation. And in this one situation, you had a 7 times higher rate of MRSA infection if you had been practicing on turf than grass. But that's a very small scale study, so I just want to caution, but there's not that much data out there on that. And the only other health concern that we had was increased risk of heat stroke, that it can be hotter, on a sunny day, because the crumb feels darker and holds heat in a different way. Temperatures can routinely get up to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. And it was an interesting article I read that one of the considerations, which is why I put it in here, is that you use the wet bulb globe. Did I say that right? Mm-hmm. That it's more important to actually use the equipment on synthetic turf when determining field playability, because there's modeling you can do, but it's not always accurate. So if we go forward with crumb rubber, we should have a really solid policy of using actual measurements on turf. It's more critical if you're deciding that with artificial turf. So that was our really nerdy review. I included in here people that are nerdier than I am about medicine and the Children's Environmental Health Center at Mount Sinai, the hospital Mount Sinai, medical school at Mount Sinai recommends a moratorium on artificial turf generated from recycled rubber tires until more evidence is available. They also included tips for safer play on artificial turf surfaces, which I included in the report in case we go forward with this, that we use the best practices that the medical professionals have recommended, such as clean cuts and abrasions immediately, brush your hair after play, clean your shoes, shower immediately after playing, always wear shoes on the turf, and make sure young children aren't ingesting it, so things like that. So if we go forward, I just want to make sure that we, don't adjust your mouth guard when you have turf. When you're a soccer player and you dive for the ball, or when you're a football player, it was interesting. I was at a party Saturday night, and a footballer was saying, I hate turf because I got my face dug into and I had a mouthful of turf. So a mouthful of crumb rubber infill. So I think it sounds crazy not to eat it, but there I was with a fabulous young man who had eaten a mouthful of turf. So he seemed okay, though. Did I get all the high points, Thomas?
I think a thing to bring up with the heat exposure is that, just to reiterate the fact that heat stroke has been fatal in football players, high school football players. It's not a joke. It's not even heat exhaustion. It's heat stroke. It can be fatal.
Right.
And this increases heat significantly, and not as an issue with health, but with increased heat can possibly be increased amounts of cancellations and a lack of access to the field because it won't be as usable if it is so hot.
So I just want to say that there, with the exception of the leg injury, there's not really long-term studies. I mean, those take years to complete. You have to put 500 athletes. The best study would be to tell them that they aren't playing on artificial turf and natural grass. That would be a double-blind study, but good luck with that. But you put 500 students for 10 years and you follow them 30 years. Some only play on artificial turf, natural grass, or you go back and you look and you compare. None of that work's been done. So these are just risk assessments on all the other materials and trying to take it to the laboratory, figure out what the risk level is, and determine if it's meeting a level that is concerned for human exposure. And that work is in the midst of being done right now. And I wish I had a chart and graph for you all.
That's a good question.
Yes.
So, Thomas, I'm just wondering what you said about access due to heat. I know, for example, like kids playing on the playground, if it gets below a certain temperature, there's like a rule that they are not allowed to go outside for recess. Did you come across anything, and Christina too, but you mentioned it, where it said you weren't allowed to play on a field if it was a certain temperature?
Well, we were talking about the heat globe. What was it called?
The wet bulb globe. Maybe Mr. Sawyer, maybe we could phone a friend and Mr. Sawyer could get, because it's not just heat, it's humidity and the wind.
I put it, so yes, in Vermont we have a heat and a cold policy. So a heat policy takes a look at the humidity and the temperature, and yes, you should use the wet bulb for accurate statement, especially on turf, but you would measure turf about 4 feet higher than the actual surface, whereas with grass you wouldn't, but turf should be measured about 4 feet higher. Like we do know that turf averages in Vermont about 10 to 12 degrees higher than the air temperature. So Vermont, heat stroke's a real thing. Kids do die. So whether it's grass or synthetic turf, when we see it's a humid day out and it's hot out, we measure our grass fields, and we've canceled practices, I think maybe twice this year, or we moved practices to early morning at 6 a.m., like usually in August preseason, or at 8 o'clock. So those are things we do. If we had a turf field, there would probably be maybe a couple more days where it would be hotter. We would move those practices. Like again, for games, we usually play night games anyways, but we'd move those to a grass field on the days we needed to, or we might have to cancel the practices just like we regularly do. And all the athletic trainers in Vermont and other New England states have said that hours they gain by having the turf field in the colder months of November and March more than make up for the 1 or 2 days they might lose during the warmer months.
What's the temperature though? What's the temperature that you're measuring?
So I don't have that on me. If the So if the temperature and the humidity hits, I think, 89.1, that's considered excessive. On excessive days, you just can't practice. If it's a high warning, we might be able to practice for 1 hour, and every 15 to 20 minutes, we have to take a 5-minute break. So we can practice 1 hour with 3 or 4 water breaks with no equipment. Then there's a degree down from that. That maybe we can practice for 1.5 hours, but we can't condition. So there's different, I can send you the policies, so the Vermont Principals Association, and again, they have a hot and cold policy that the entire state follows.
Any other questions on health from the board?
I do. Is there any way to cool down the turf? I mean, if it's at a certain, is there?
So what is done, and Chris can jump in if I'm misspeaking, what's often done is you pour water all over it, but it only lasts for 20 minutes to cool it down. So
it's not very long lasting.
It's not very long lasting in general. So
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think most people at turf really say it's not worth wasting the water resource on cooling a field down because it doesn't happen. So again, common sense, hydrating the athletes and just being aware of the temperature and really paying attention to that. That's the main thing. We wouldn't waste water trying to cool a field down.
plus you'd be 20 minutes into it, you might have to stop
And then
playing
right
to
back
water
up.
down a
Yeah.
field. I mean, that's
Doesn't
not
really
optimal
work.
conditions for playing any sport, I would think. Good question. Climate change, you want to share what you,
We did that. Right, I can do it again.
oh, you did already? Oh,
Yeah, I mean.
We might just, mention it in this context.
sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, because you did under committee reports? Gotcha. Okay, and I missed that, sorry.
I can
My
bring up the
apologies.
exact notes, but it.
Okay.
Basically, the proposed field is made out of plastic, which is, I should have this in front of me. Fossil fuels are used for the creation of it. Natural grass sod is traps carbon, lets off oxygen, and then there's the concern with if we had the artificial turf, it would have to be disposed of probably in 8 to 12 years, and then new material made out of fossil fuels would have to be again purchased. That's the gist of it.
Thank you. Thanks for catching me up, sorry. So, is there a motion, or was there any other information anybody needs, or anything anybody wants from any committee that we feel we don't have? I guess is my first question. Okay. Are there,
It depends on what we're going to be deciding on, I guess.
right, I guess it depends on the motion, but if somebody says,
Yeah.
wait a minute, can't even talk about this because I don't even have a sense of whatever, then that's one option. Then I would guess I would ask if there is a motion.
I have an idea.
Chance for any comment? There will be, we won't vote until public comments.
Yeah, I think well, we've been looking at this for a long time, and with the things that we've found and other things we've heard from the public all through this time, we're still going to need, if we did install an artificial field, we'd still need to make a large investment at Sawyer Field to bring it up to gender equity standards. We'd still have to make that up. It wouldn't solve all of our problems, particularly the equity ones. There are clear environmental issues, clear climate issues, even if we didn't use crumb rubber. The lower leg injury data is solid. It's not really something that you can deny. The carcinogens are harder to track, but carcinogens are cumulative. They don't you don't get cancer quickly from exposure to them. It's over a long period of time, so there's no way to know that except that they are carcinogens. The infections are issues, the heat is an issue. Mount Sinai asking for a moratorium certainly indicates that there's reputable people concerned about it. I think it's, I think we should consider looking at looking at other ways to solve the problems that have been identified. And I know they're, well, we've talked a lot about it, but I think we should consider what actually Mr. Perrin mentioned in the Finance Committee meeting about pursuing an independent review of the fields we control, and a longer-term feasibility study about how to meet the needs that we have. I think one thing that would be important about that, and I could make that as a motion, but one of the things that would be important about that is to identify what are the problems. We know about we can't do anything about the extended season, that depends on the weather. But as far as equity, quality playing fields, or access, or enough practice time, and all the other issues, we can look at other options for that. We do have 4 fields that we own, plus a practice field. And unfortunately, nighttime darkness in the fall is an issue, but we moved the school day an hour later, so we shortened the practice times after school. And this is one of the consequences. Having lights on more fields would make that easier. But I think we should look at the proposal to get an independent review of the fields and look for a long-term feasibility study after we identify what we see as the issues, like gender balance, lights, facilities, upgrading grass, things like that. Yeah, I think that's kind of my sense. You want to make a motion?
Can you make a motion for poor Wendy? That was a long motion for Wendy.
Yeah, okay. Well, I move that the board either have the Programmatic and Performance Equity Committee or the administration. It really doesn't matter. We should probably talk about, since equity is a big part of it, we may want to play a role in that, but to pursue an independent review of the fields we control and a long-term feasibility study for natural turf.
Is there a second on that motion? Thank you for the motion.
I'll second.
Thank you, Kelly. Discussion from the board. Yeah, you're gonna have to wait a while, folks. Okay.
We made it 6 weeks for a chance to talk about it.
I know, finally we get to talk. So I will take comments from the public. We had a full public comment section last time. If you spoke and used your 2 to 3 minutes last time, again, I respectfully ask that you limit your time tonight to like 30 seconds, please, because I would like this not to go till midnight. If you did not speak last time, I want to make sure people have an opportunity to be heard.
It's going to be difficult to know with time 30 seconds.
Right, okay, we'll give them a minute. We'll give them a minute. We'll give them a minute. We'll give them a minute.
So I will hold up one finger after your 1 minute is done, so then be done.
Your pointer, okay?
I don't have my belt.
So, Mr. Dimes, please state your name, address. Let me just go through the ground rules quickly. I was not here at the beginning. Sorry. When you stand if you're able, it's a little bit easier for people to hear you in the room. State your name, address your comments to me. Please avoid personal attacks. We're all been working very hard and very tired. So please try to speak with respect to the board members and to other people in the room. And with that, I kick off with you.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My name is Kurt Dimes. I live in Brattleboro. I think there was a missed opportunity by the subcommittees to present relevant data. The budget share per sport might have been considered. I understand from a friend that her friend's sons were state champions 2 years in a row in Nordic skiing, yet they got not 1 cent to support their sport. A broader view, I think maybe non-intramural sports, that is intramural sports, like touch football, would be safer and cheaper. We wouldn't have to pay insurance. I think Mr. Rucker could confirm we'd probably pay $1 million of insurance because of the heavy contact sports. There's also another thing that's unrepresented here, education. Exercise, we all know, is good for education, but intramural sports and uniforms are not. They do not give any extra benefit to education. So our students would be well served to just have plenty of exercise. They don't need a football team, a soccer team, and so forth. But that can be organized by the State Recreation Department at Gibson Aiken Center. Thank you.
I will yield the floor to Mr. Karen for his 2 minutes.
I don't need 2 minutes. I just want to refute the assertion that Nordic is an unfunded sport. That is a false statement. It's a fully funded varsity sport. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dunn.
Yes, I'd first like to address the comment that what we're looking for is an opportunity for students. And some of that opportunity is the benefit of sports. I think you can find a number of students who have taken sports at the high school level and parlay that into good opportunities for further education in secondary schools. I'd question the existing motion as it was phrased just to deal with a natural turf field. I think you have to compare apples to oranges. If you're going to have an independent study, it shouldn't be just of natural turf. It should be natural turf and artificial turf. And also I'd question, and ask Mr. Sawyer can respond to this, why is this independent study different than the one that has already been done? Mr. Sawyer's, in his statement, the 2-page statement that was given to the board, he details that this has already been done. I'd also question with respect to the equity and use aspects, understanding what the additional hours of use of the field would be. As to health, there was no discussion of alternative fill. There are fills other than chrome rubber. Those were discussed by Mr. Sawyer and priced out, and those can substantially decrease the issues with respect to health. And I'll leave it at that.
I will say that it was included in the report that they didn't have any data on the alternative infills, particularly about the health effects, so I did not include, there's no research on them. Like, so there's some concern about some of the encapsulated, so there's no research on that to say there's very little research on the chrome rubber. One would think that, I agree, Mr. Dunn, but there was, in terms of a research review, there is really almost no research on these fairly new infill surfaces, so, but I did include that in the written report, but just didn't touch on it. No data.
And that includes, the natural?
That includes the natural, yeah. There was some possible concerns with that as well. I can't, like dust or something, I don't quite remember, but there haven't been any tests on it. Yes. Don't get me talking about research, David. We'll be here all night. It was fascinating. But I mean, one would think they were less toxic, and yes, I agree with you in principle on that. But that there was no research one way or the other for me to stand on. So it was not included here.
Hi, my name is Jeff Stent from Brattleboro, and this is to address, it's not actually to address an opinion on artificial versus sod or any of that stuff. It's to just kind of lay out some facts to address this gentleman's thoughts about having the public vote on it. The reality is the public has voted on this on June 12th, and the intent of the public at that point in time, which is actually pretty well documented in the Reformer. Well, at that time, the intent was for the public and the previous board, before this board took over, to proceed with and fund an artificial turf. And that's indicated in June 25th, first annual meeting, Southeast School District first annual meeting, where Dick DeGray referred to the artificial turf that had, quote unquote, had been previously approved at the June 12th special district meeting. And the June 26th Brattleboro Reformer states the budgeting included a quote unquote installing the synthetic turf. And the June 27th Finance Committee meeting, where the committee authorized to transfer up to $500,000 from the general operating fund to the capital reserve fund, pending the final accounting close of the fiscal year of, for the BUHS district. So my question is first to Dr. Rucker, that $500,000, was that specifically for a synthetic turf field?
So your time is up and the questions are addressed to me, so.
He's on the finance committee and he's the one who, okay, was it or not? Because it was.
If the board wants that question answered, I can have that question answered.
Oh my God.
So, so that meeting was June 27, and of course the fiscal year ends June 30th. And notice the minutes, as you correctly referred to, said up to 500,000. As we closed the books, that was an optimistic, but it was not expected it'd be 500,000. It turned out to be a $200,000 fiscal year end surplus that was transferred to the capital fund. That 200,000 was for the capital reserve fund, and as it stated, the several projects, you can see that on the website, you can see it in the annual report that was published for the BUHS district. It was not specifically earmarked for the turf field. It was for all of the projects that were identified in the capital fund.
Including the turf field?
Including the turf field.
Including the synthetic turf field?
Yes, including
Okay, so,
the field.
I'm sorry, we don't, excuse me.
hold on.
No, I'm sorry,
Article 5B
excuse me, you're out of
says you
order.
can't do this.
You used up more than your time. I've had your question answered. You were beyond time when I stopped you. I allowed your question to be answered. We're moving on to the next person, because if I change the rules for you, I change them for everyone.
Well, you already changed them for people. You said if it's relevant. You already changed them for other. You can't not change them for me.
I had a board vote on the change to allow somebody to speak earlier because I thought they couldn't stay.
Right, so.
So moving on, who else would like to speak?
Wait a minute. This is the law. You guys are breaking the law. You're breaking the law. Knowingly and willingly breaking the law.
I have allowed comment. You were allowed comment at the last meeting. I gave you the time that he had his finger up and you continued to speak. I had your question answered. You are continuing to delay the meeting. You are out of order.
Can we just have a point of clarification from the press?
Yes.
The motion that we both reported was for necessary capital improvements to the recreational field.
Yes, that was my recollection of the vote that night, to authorize a loan of up to $750,000 for necessary improvements to the recreational field.
Can I just ask that the motion, according to what we reported and what we have on tape, did not include either the words artificial or synthetic. Is that correct?
To my knowledge, that's correct. If anybody has other knowledge, please let me know.
Later in the meeting.
Next.
Press is all set? Thank you.
Marilyn Carroll of Brattleboro. I just have a question about a couple of the presentations. On equity, the charts, I wonder if you had any idea of the number of hours of use per field were in use. And as some of you know, at the last meeting I presented that in Springfield, Massachusetts, they're using natural grass very intensively with many different sports. So I don't know that it's really an equity issue. Chemical fertilizer would not be used with the natural grass, hopefully. Organically managed will give you a much deeper root system. And one thing that I think was lacking in the health report was the most recent indication that PFAS are found in artificial turf. And those are cumulative.
Thank you. As a point of clarity, it was in my report. There's not a lot of data about levels or risk assessments because that came out on my birthday, so it's relatively new, such as my old age is as well. So there is not any research about the levels, so I did not include it. Obviously, it's concerning.
Should I respond to the plate?
If you have a quick answer, or you could send it. I mean, you could probably do it offline.
Yeah, I can do it offline.
Chris has a comment.
Mr. Sawyer.
Well, just to clarify, just the equity report, there's a lot of good data there. Thanks for presenting it that way. To be clear, right now there's 9 football games being played on that field. There would be 7 girls soccer, 7 boys soccer, and 14 field hockey games. So girls soccer would be played on that field. You had mentioned JV teams don't play. The reason we don't play varsity games at Sawyer Field is if we did that, we'd lose 2 teams would have to cancel practice every time we had a game because we'd lose practice spots because we don't have enough fields. So that's why we play night soccer games, not because we love staying all night, but it's one way to fit a practice in before games. Yeah, actually, Sawyer Field right now does have bleachers for softball. Tenny Field does not have bleachers for baseball. So there's just, they're there, they're just unusable, but that would clarify. So I'm just looking at the fall use, we get about 650 hours on Natowich Field versus the current 48 hours we're using it now. And all of our fields are in use about 200 hours per season, or close to 400 hours, which, looking at Treetop Park in Springfield, is roughly within 50 hours of use of what they're doing down there. So we do use our fields quite a bit.
Jamie,
Jamie Coldwell Putney, 2 questions. I was really looking forward to the Finance Committee doing a cost comparison on all costs associated with the 3 choices we've discussed, which was the turf with crumb, turf with organic, and then natural grass. That includes maintenance, and so I'm wondering when that will be presented to the public, because I think I've been really concerned about how Act 173 will downshift costs onto us and might lead to programming in schools needing to be cut if we have downshifting of costs and special ed being really negatively impacted. At the same time, we don't understand the costs of these 3 options. And then the other thing is, I wanted to ask the board to ask Frank Rucker if his belief is that we have voted on artificial turf, because I feel like there's some misinformation that I thought I just heard, and so I just am trying to figure that out, and I wanted to know if the board would clarify if our administration believes we voted on that.
Thank you. I hesitate to, Frank is a very talented man, genius with the numbers, and can quote much chapter and verse of Title 16, the education chapter of our beloved Vermont statutes. I think to have him rule as a parliamentarian is maybe beyond his expertise. So I will say that I have passed it by Donna Russo-Savage, who said that that vote as it stood alone did not constitute a vote for artificial turf, and they're not required to. And I got a verbal, I passed that along to the committee, to the full board, and I had a phone conversation with Sue Siglowski, who's legal counsel for Vermont School Board Association, who concurred with that, that assessment of that motion. Was not, if we were going to make a motion, and if we were going to put it to the public, in my mind, it would be, shall the voters of WSESD expend $1.25 million on artificial turf with crumb rubber infill? I'm not saying I made that motion, that's not a warning, that's what would be an adequate motion to do that, in my mind. That's my opinion, and that's what I've heard from people that specialize in education law, so.
And will we get the final
So I can't do follow-up questions, because then I would have to do them with everybody else, but I'll try to answer the little questions as they come along. Sorry, Jamie. And I think the
Hi, my name's John Murphy. I'm in Brattleboro, and I have a son in high school. I also help out with the lacrosse programs. I can't help but feel like every time a synthetic field comes up, people have a visceral reaction to that. And I certainly understand being a parent myself. But are we being a little disingenuous? I mean, where's the outrage over the roof improvements? And the flooring, how much VOC are we using in that? Has anybody brought any other environmental concerns with any other capital expenditure other than the synthetic field? And the second point being, we tend to run a little hard and fast on the natural fields. I think if we were going to use our field as much as we would like to use them here, we would probably have to resod it every year. Nobody's mentioned anything about pest control, weed control, watering, mowing. I also coached the 8th grade lacrosse program in their inaugural year last year. We got 60% of our games canceled due to natural field conditions. And I have one suggestion. There is one thing, which is the carbon sequestration I agree with. San Francisco environmental ballpark, 52 cubic meters per 10 years. If we were to, let's say, have the student booster club and student leadership plant trees, we get seedlings at $1.50 each. 6,000 trees would offset more than 60 tons of carbon that has been sequestered by natural field. Thank you.
Just a point of clarification, we actually do put a lot of effort into trying to improve our carbon footprint as a school board, reducing lighting, alternate heating. So I just wanted to be clear that we do.
May I clarify my point, please? My point was the public has showed no outrage on any of the capital expenditures,
Thank you
except
for
for
that.
the field.
Thank you for that clarification, because we're doing our due diligence as citizens.
Thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Mr. Zucchini.
Henry Zucchini, Brattleboro. I won't get into what I've talked about many times about how this expenditure, increased expenditure for artificial turf will impact the education. The money that goes into education won't go into education, other parts of the school that are desperately needed. I won't go into the fact that as was said by the press, that this motion had nothing to do with artificial turf. It had to do with a vote on resurfacing the field. What I will say is, how cool would it be for you as a board if you were, instead of on the cutting edge of putting another horrible synthetic field into if you were on the cutting edge of an organic field that could be, we know, I disagree, Madam Chairwoman, with the person that just spoke that said no one talked about what the expenses would go into it. In fact, there was a long presentation about organic field management in Springfield, Massachusetts, with heavier usage than this field would get, and they're working wonderfully. And so wouldn't that be, what a cool legacy for this board to actually have be the model for the state, not this kind of shiny new plastic dump, but of a shiny new organically managed field. How cool would that be? Thank you.
Richard Basile, Putney. I'm not going to read this whole letter. It was, as the board requested, there are a lot of people who feel strongly about this. If we each had 2 minutes, we'd be here all night. This was a letter circulated today. We got 100 signatures in 8 hours. So we've emailed it to you guys, and as I was listening to you rattling off it sounded a bit like those ads on TV. Take this wonderful pill, and then they rattle off 45 seconds worth of why you're going to die. So, what you said is all in here and more. There's plenty of benefits to natural grass. It seems pretty clear to me the way things ought to go. And there's plenty of other people who feel the same way.
Ruby McAdoo, Putney. I had two points, and I'll try to be really brief because I would like to be. One is, I would appreciate it, and I think the public would appreciate it, if some of the fantastic graphs that the Equity Committee created, and if there are any financial analysis of the different fields, if that was made public in some way on the website, that would be extremely helpful. And then I guess this is something I went to the last Equity Committee meeting and I raised this particular point. I feel like I don't have kids that go to the high school. I'm not sure that they will play sports. So this is me as an observer of all that you guys have been doing. An observer is a person in town who knows, I didn't go to the climate strike, but I know many people who did. I watched video of it. It was a huge presence. And so this decision, if you decide to go with crumb rubber fill, I feel like it's a slap in the face of this community. And that's not the right decision to go forward. And what I see, I may be wrong, but what I see is that from this board's positioning, you are essentially dragging your feet a little bit. And I think you should make the decision to not go with crumb rubber, and you should tell the administration, we are not doing that. Give us information about artificial fill or turf. To me, that seems like where the decision that needs to be made, in my opinion.
Mr. Williams? Mr. Williams, nice job tonight at the National.
Thank you. I would just like to talk a few points that I noticed. One, the fact that this is being compared to the negative side effects of drugs and what everyone's seen on TV. The people doing this and the people pushing for this field have kids, have student athletes playing on this field. We're not trying to do anything negative to our student athlete or our school community. The second thing too is, I was at the climate walkout. I was there, I was downtown. And I think for right now, this is the most direct solution we have to our student athletes and to this athletic community here at UHS. to say that I just think by not getting a direct resolution to this field problem, and if this is the most direct one that has been going since 2002, 17 years building this project, doing renovations to improve our facilities for our athletes and our student athletes, or our athletic students, that it's kind of a slap in the face to those kids and those teams that have to practice, on an infield of a baseball field, or on the small square footage that we have at Fort Dummer when other teams are practicing there, with the football team filled in that space, and then the soccer team, 2 JV soccer teams with the middle school, Vaubec being used, Sawyer Field being split by 2 teams at once, every practice, splitting halves. So I would just like to see a direct resolution, and I think we have one laid out right in front of us. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Dina Chadwick. I'm from Brattleboro. I'm a 4th generation Vermonter. My daughter's 5th. So, we got blood here. I've listened to everybody talk today, and I was really excited when the vote, I thought, went through back in June. So I was like, yay, my daughter will get to play on a great field, because currently she plays field hockey, and in front of the goalie is dirt. And I even heard one of the referees said they couldn't make a call because it was so dusty. And that is unacceptable. And I think that we need to really think about our athletes, because yes, there's put money into education, put money into music, but don't we all want to be well-rounded? We all would talk about balance, and every teenager's got a screen in front of their face. Let's give them something exciting to look at and play on. Like right now, it's crap. I went to 90% of my daughter's games, so I went to all different schools. And let me tell you, Brattleboro's the worst school with the worst fields. Not the worst school, but with the worst conditioned fields. So, we spent a lot of money on Chromebooks. Every student gets a Chromebook. Let's balance it out. Let's pull kids in. Some kids only go to school because they're involved in sports. Don't we want to foster that? In the growing part of obesity in this nation, don't we want to encourage kids to get out there and move and give them something that they could be excited about and be a part of and be a team of? My daughter has, I've seen her grown so much this year because she was part of this awesome field hockey team. And her self-confidence just went through the roof. I think all of our student athletes deserve this. So thank you very much for your time, and your graphs were amazing and very eye-opening about inequality. We need to work on that. Thank you.
Your comments, the board shares your opinion about equity for girls in sports, absolutely. Liz.
Liz Adams from Putney. One thing missing from this conversation is that field hasn't been resurfaced since 1965. Just doing aeration on that field isn't enough. Everything in there is so compacted that yes, you're going to have major problems. I was appalled when that information came up. There is no way that field's in good shape. Probably should be plowed and compost put in it, and you would see a different grass field than what you've got out there. But when you don't maintain an asset for that length of time, you're going to have problems, and that's exactly what you're seeing. So I would really like to see a study done, an engineering study done, because they mentioned drainage. What did they do in '65 for drainage? Nothing. I lived back then. I mean, they didn't. So I think that needs to be addressed, and it hasn't been addressed.
I'll be quick. Oh, sorry, Jake, I'll do it. I didn't see you, but I'll call you on you after. I just called on Tara.
Tara Castine, sorry. I think the motion on the table is for review of the surfaces that you have available. Is that correct? I would urge, as we look at 10 different schools within this merged district, there are fields at every single school which should be evaluated for options and availability to increase the equity of playtime on maybe fields that have space or availability, or the options to be upgraded easier as a point of just conversation.
Thank you, Tara. Django.
Hi, I'm Django Grayson, student here in Brattleboro. So I play soccer, and when I first heard about the turf field, my initial thought was, wow, this is super cool. I'm coming to this high school, and I'm gonna be playing on that field, maybe if I'm good enough. But as I kind of like looked into it more, I realized that like, I've come to the point where I realized that like, I think that I put my future over having a field, and that sounds drastic. I know like putting some plastic isn't gonna stop climate change. I'm gonna like not putting down some plastic isn't gonna stop climate change. And I'm not like really good at soccer, and it's not like my life. But I would say that like having the inconvenience of not playing a few soccer games, I put any piece of a brighter future for me and all of my peers over an inconvenience a couple times. And I'm not speaking for anybody else, this is my opinion.
Well said, Django. Thank you. Ms. Price.
I'm Price Brattleboro. Just have a quick question, because in the Articles of Agreement, it states in Article, looks like 5B, the new union district shall apply any reserve fund for this fund's specific purpose if identified unless otherwise determined through appropriate legal procedures. What are the appropriate legal procedures that you all have done to negate spending it as it was voted? And making calls to attorneys does not seem like appropriate legal procedures to not do what was already voted on.
So that vote did not create a fund. So if the vote had created a fund of $1.25 million for artificial turf, we would not be having these meetings. It would be done. The capital plan shows $125,000 over several years coming out. There's $3.4 million in the capital fund and $3.4 million worth of work in the BUHS capital plan, roughly. Is that a good guesstimate off the top of my head? Mm-hmm. And we have $1.2 million in the capital fund?
1.6.
1.6, sorry. Okay, well, we're doing better than that. We have $1.6 million in there. So if the capital fund isn't fully funded, it's on this board to determine the spending according to. So it's we're not spending the BUHS capital fund on improvements for Academy School. It's staying with the BUHS fund. So that is how it has been explained to me. So that's not that we can't take it and use it for general education. Yes, Ms. Jill.
Hi, I'm Jill Williams from Guilford. Last Thursday, there was a finance committee meeting, correct?
Yes.
And at that meeting, Chris Sawyer presented a 2-page document that listed the various possible fills, cost per square footage, the reasons that this improvement were ever instigated. I know that the board got this. I'm wondering if the public has seen this.
I don't know, I'm not chair of that committee.
But you were at the meeting.
Yes, but I'm not the chair of the meeting's chair, so I didn't handle the paperwork for that committee. So
I'm going to say, rather than make it a question, that the public has not seen this piece of paper. And it addresses a lot of the questions that folks have tonight about how is this, what's the breakdown analysis? How did this ever start? It's the whole history. And on the back is a comparison. And if the public hasn't seen this, but the board has, I have concerns.
David, you'd like to respond?
Yeah, I think we haven't until now recognized that we have a need to make sure that we develop a policy or real clear expectations about what happens to communications. And one of the things I wrote down in my notes from tonight before we finish is to make it really clear that committee reports and communications that come to us go with the minutes of the meeting where that happened, right, including all the committees and everything. If it hits the table at a school board meeting, it's a public document. But if it's not available anywhere else, then you have to be at the meeting to have access to that document. But my point is that by the end of the night, we will have solved that problem. and all these documents will be loaded to the website.
This
As
one's ready?
that one too.
So-
There are probably 9 documents that came along at the same time, not at that meeting, but previously, from Mr.
Does
Sawyer.
it not seem important?
Excuse me, we're not having a back and forth. I've
Yeah.
asked, I've kept that
We'll
with
fix it.
everyone.
That's the point.
So, open meeting law requires that any public document anyone requests, we have to reproduce. It does not require that we have to post them on the website. That would make a full-time job for Barb Norkowski, so we're gonna have to figure that out. The request of the board, the request of the finance committee, I will say, because I was there for that request, was that we create a document that shows the costs and the maintenance cost for all the various options with chrome rubber, with a shock pad, including grass, including the natural grass option as well. And so that document is not complete. Unfortunately, that meeting ended before we could complete that work. And so to send out, to respond with a document that is half filled with information that the committee was not tasked to do, which is good committee procedure to do what was asked, and not including all the answers, didn't seem like it was really a good choice. It has been passed on to the board so the board could have some of the information, but we don't have any of the grass information that the board had tasked the committee to do. So,
It feels like.
yes, 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 John.
Christina?
No,
Christina,
I'm sorry you're not finished, Jill.
I was still.
I have
standing
called
in
on
date.
Sean.
I think what you're referring to is the minutes for the October 31st,
No, this is.
the
from
Thursday,
last-
the October, no, don't talk to me. Let me say something and then you can get some more time later. On October 31st, we had a finance committee meeting. We approved the minutes for that tonight, so they will be posted tomorrow. The draft minutes are usually posted, but it slipped through the cracks, so that the draft minutes were not on the website, but they will be on the website tomorrow, because now they are an approved minute. And on the second, in that is the information that Chris Sawyer gave us, that you're just referring to.
I think this is different. This is from last Thursday.
Yes, that's what I'm
These are the
talking about.
minutes of the meeting
Thursday, the
Thursday.
31st of October.
The documents included in the minutes, that's how we posted it.
Oh, this is in the minutes, the chart as well. Okay. Nobody said that. So public, everything is in the minutes, if you're looking for a cost analysis.
It doesn't include grass.
Yes, Jill.
So just, I'm confused as to what the original motion was. Can I hear that again? And then I might have a question.
Thank you for that point of clarification. I've forgotten now too.
Or is he?
I can give you my best notes, but David can perhaps,
Well, I hope you wrote it down. But
well, here's what I have.
Okay.
Because I was gonna ask you if you could send me the exact language, because it seems like you were reading from something.
I
Am
was
correct?
reading from here, from chunks, but I'll try.
Okay, so here's what I have. That the board either has the, what is it, PPEC, because
CPE committee, yeah.
you know, because we're dealing with my shorthand too, or the administration pursue independent, now I have to read my writing, independent review of fields we control and a long-term feasibility study.
That's
Does that sound
exactly it.
about- okay.
So then my question on this is gonna come back to, I guess, what Mr. Dunn started with as well, that we've spent a lot of time as public, and you guys as the board, you've spent committee meetings, it seems like you're trying to come up with things, but it doesn't seem very clear whether you're actually including all the options that you were just talking about in the finance committee notes. To me, you have two charges: to do the most equitable programming that you can at the best price for your students and your taxpayers. And in order to make that decision, it seems like you need a motion that actually brings that forward. I don't hear that in the motion, so I have concerns about your motion.
Paul Normando, Demiston. Regarding the motion, does that include a study of both natural field and turf field? You know the pros and cons, and in terms of, in light of the utilization required. Is that what you're directing the
No,
administration?
well, that was my intention.
Okay.
The intention is to study the fields that we control, to see what we can do to meet the need, to meet the obviously identified needs, and then some of the recently identified needs as well.
I have a feeling based upon the conversation that's been occurring, that that's already been done by the administration. But my concern is that I think the public would like to know the information on both a turf field and a natural field. Even though my personal preference would be to go with, for philosophical reasons, to a natural field. But I think the public would like to know the pros and cons of each, and then have that be used as a decision that the board would make. So that's full. And I think Steve Perrin referred to that earlier in the Finance Committee meeting.
I think for clarification, because it was Steve's suggestion at the Finance Committee meeting, more or less.
Right, so as I was thinking about options and what we would look at, when I talk about a long-term study, what I mean is that we would literally look at what we have for real estate, irregardless of current use. Whether it's a baseball field, football field, softball field, we would look at our current status in terms of what space do we have available. We would have somebody come in and help us decide, is there a more efficient way to use available space? That may be that we relocate baseball fields, we relocate softball fields. It may, I mean, it would be a big undertaking. It may be that we have to revisit our agreement with team tennis. It may, all of those things would be on the table, because what we would say to a consultant is, here's our acreage, here's our need. Is it feasible for us to do this? We know that one feasible option is to install a synthetic surface. But if we're going to look at everything, then what we really need to do is we need to look at everything, and that includes looking at some venerable hallowed ground and saying, is this the best use of this current field? So when I say a study, I mean a real comprehensive study, starting from the ground up. How would we recreate all of our athletic facilities and all of our fields?
Yeah, my intention was that before we did that, we would identify the needs and the goals that we have for these programs, and then see how to make that happen on the fields that we have. So it's a different approach.
Right, and that's part of the study. But the idea is that we would say to a person coming in, these are our needs, and this is our usage. So we would do that, and then we'd have them look at the real estate and say, okay, let's play around with this. Let's move some blocks around and see what it looks like. So I think we're saying the same thing.
Most likely.
Yeah.
I'd love to do that.
Well, that's what the motion's for.
But I'm not an expert.
Excuse me, Jody. Yes, Kelly.
So I tried to wait to make sure that everybody sort of had their say, and a lot of very interesting, very passionate comments, and everyone seems to have a real interest in taking care of our students and the athletics, and an interest in the other portions of the school day and evening. And I wanted to make a comment on something that was mentioned before about how academics seems to be more important than sports. And my children will tell you that academics is very important in our household, and as many households, I'm sure. However, I think, now I never played on a sports team, so I'm seeing this as an observer, and from children who've been on the track and the cross-country teams. There is a value in sports, in team building, in cooperation, in learning that not everyone wins first place, but you put in your full effort. And if you work for something, if you strive for something, if you you try to persevere even when things don't seem to be going your way, there's a benefit in that. And so I think that academics is certainly important, and I want to continue to maintain high standards and funding towards academics. And I think the mention about the Chromebooks, every student gets Chromebooks. I think we do, from my sort of perspective, I think we do a pretty good job of that, and I would love to hear if other people have sort of perspectives, and if they want to talk afterwards, that's fine. I would welcome that. But I really think that sports is important for the fact that it's, we have to learn how to live and work, and the students have to learn when they go off into the world, they have to learn how to work with other people and be a team person. So I just wanted to say that. And the fact that we have a difficult decision to make, or difficult decisions, because I don't think it's just going to come down to one or the other, but I don't think that I don't think we're going to make everyone happy, and it's unfortunate, but I think that's really one of the challenges we're facing.
Thank you, Carol. Is it a point of order or point of clarification? Because
Yes,
given
point of order, I think at some point before the board votes, that it would probably be appropriate for Mr. Scholes to restate his motion, but it's been pushed around.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you. Point of order or point of clarification? Because you've already spoken to the discussion.
Response to Kelly.
I don't want to indulge in back and forth because I think we can all sit with that dissonance, and I don't think it's an existential question in this discussion. Is there any more? Yes,
I'll make a comment. I was on the BOHS board for many years, and this whole thing about possibility to have an artificial surface on Natowich came up a long time ago. And at first I was a little reluctant to support it. And then when I was educated about, because of the topography of where we live, right on the confluence of the Connecticut and the West River, there's not a lot of flat land, and sports are important for high school students, even if they participate or not. My son was in 2 varsity sports and made a huge difference to him, and he loved it. And then I've been doing a lot of reading, a lot of research, and I look at Harvard University. My goodness, there's a group of extremely well-educated people. They have like 7 artificial turf fields. Some of them are right next to the Charles River, Soldiers Field, and they're incredible. I was a soccer player in college. I obviously didn't have any turf fields, synthetic turf fields when I was in college, but when you play soccer, when you play football, lacrosse, the field surface makes a big difference. If you have, it's like going to Memorial or to the Brattleboro Outing Club and playing on the clay courts. It's a pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure to play. It feels wonderful to hit the ball, see the ball come up. And the same thing would be true with a synthetic turf field. It would be excellent playability. I have also read a tremendous amount this past week, and I actually got a hold of the Vermont Department of Health, and I talked with a woman up there who's the state toxicologist. She has a doctorate in toxicology. Extremely well-educated woman on dangers of all kinds. It's not molecular epidemiology, but it's toxicology. And she didn't have huge red flags to bring up with artificial surfaces. Would I vote for it if I knew that there were? Absolutely not. Do I know that they're not? I'm a little, it's a very, very difficult thing to know where to vote. But I would have to say, because of this school, this interest in sports, I mean, look what the soccer team did this year. They went to almost to the end. They lost in the last game. And the football team is going to play Friday night. Saturday night. Thank you, in Rutland.
Saturday at 11.
For the state championship. This doesn't happen very often in Brattleboro. But anyway, I am really tempted to say that a synthetic field would be a good thing for this community. And I will say it, I just did.
Is it a point of order or a point of clarification, Jody?
Well, I would just clarify that we heard that from a young lady who was a soccer player.
No,
One other meeting.
no, this is not a point of order, not a point of clarification.
That they did not like the field.
You had your comment time, we had public comment. You did not speak before? It's okay with the board, should we give Jody 1 minute? She didn't use her speaking time before.
Sure.
1 minute, Jody.
I just wanted to say that we heard from a young lady who plays varsity soccer that the soccer girls do not want to play on artificial fields.
That's not true.
That's all I wanted to say.
A few of them.
Gus, I think you spoke. Is it a point of order or a point of clarification?
I'd just like to add that the football finals on turf field and our semifinal for the boys varsity soccer team is on turf field. So South Burlington, Rutland, other D1 schools in the state. So thank you.
Any other board discussion? I would say that we did talk in finance about the possibility of sending it back to the voters. We had talked about getting RFQs, but I think there's a concern about doing that unless we're absolutely committed to going forth with it. So if you were not here for finance, and I'm sorry I wasn't here for the update, I think that was one of the pathways we had discussed that we are thinking is not the best choice to proceed with an RFQ if we are not pretty committed to doing it, because it may mean that future bids do not come in because we're not considered to be serious about sending out RFQs. I think that's one of the things we'd said, let's just send out the RFQ so we can have real costs, but there's a cost associated with that. It is not actually free in terms of real costs. So, but we have a motion on the table.
So I would just like a little bit of clarification on it. You're saying we're just going to study what we need, what our needs are, and what our resources are. That's the motion?
No, well, as Wendy said, it's to pursue an independent review of fields we control and a long-term feasibility study for what we can do to meet the needs that have been identified, that we know. And the performance and equity and the Programmatic and Performance Equity Committee identified some additional needs that we didn't talk about, and then we just had a comment from Tara about the elementary school. So it's expanded from just the high school. But it's to look at what we have and find out what we can do with the natural surfaces that we have to meet our needs.
And sorry, I didn't catch her name. Like she brought up, are we going to talk about other schools as well? She was saying we could think about the possibility of
we
other.
have to. Okay. Yeah, I didn't think of it because we've only been talking about this field, but if we're going to look at all the issues, then we have to look at all the schools too.
Or even like how the high school could use other fields if we're all in the same school district.
Possibly, but I think it was more about what are those fields like? What's the quality like there? What's the equity of use? What are the issues in the other schools as well? Okay. So we're going to have to look at the whole district.
All right.
I think we just want to make sure, I mean, we haven't decided on any of this, it's just brainstorm because it's not in the motion. So when we're figuring out essentially what the needs that we identify, I mean, the NAACP had talked about accessibility for people who are, low income and all these different categories, right? So I know on the PPEC committee, we had discussed a little bit about travel time to all these different places and busing. And I mean, so what Jill brought up is like cost and equity. So although we might want to be broad brush, maybe as a board, when we and as the administration and we all kind of get together to figure out our needs, there may be some things that may be not feasible to look at. So I don't know if we're making it that broad from the motion. I mean, maybe we are, and everybody can just maybe put that in the motion if you really want it to be that, but I hesitate to agree that that's exactly where we're going.
And I think that's partly the work of our committee to identify that, to figure that out.
Yes, Sean.
I think I would probably vote against the motion, and the reason is that it is too ambiguous. Is it what Steve Perrin said, which is an engineering study? which
No.
would cost in excess of $50,000?
No, it's not.
Is it something that, the board members just sit around and come up with data and talk about? So, anyway, I think I probably would vote against the motion for that specific reason. It's too ambiguous.
Isn't it independent though? So it wouldn't be the board members.
I think it was an independent.
Well, that
consultant.
proves my point. I rest my case.
It says independent.
Yeah, and
In the
independent is not defined, so it's too ambiguous for my taste.
Would you like to make an amendment that would clarify?
No, I wouldn't.
I'm able to go to a second level amendment. I'm willing to do it at 8:30.
No, I think that,
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
if we were to do the study I described, it would be independent, but it would involve engineering because we would have to look at stormwater impact. So it wouldn't just be, us looking, it would be an engineering study. So I want to be clear, if we're going to do it right, we're going to have to look at the impact on changing fields, what happens to water runoff, what do we have to do for drainage. So, Sean pointed out it would have to be a bigger study to be effective.
Okay, so maybe we want an amendment.
Can I just ask a clarifying question though? So when you had talked about the engineering study, I remember specifically for the grass, right?
Right.
If we were gonna do grass, you had said to get that whole study done, it would cost ballpark, you didn't commit to it, but 70,000, let's say.
Right, and that was that was for that one field.
So that's for the one field. So when you're talking about if we were to include engineering, what kind of money are you talking about?
I don't know. What we probably do is call companies we've worked with in the past when we do feasibility studies, and we'd get a ballpark figure. I wouldn't say in public that I would have a guess. It would be more than 70,000. But if we're gonna really analyze and put a long-term plan together, then we really probably it's an investment.
Of course. Last clarification. So somebody had said there was already an independent study done.
Yep.
And, I've seen different things from 2008 that an independent study was done, but it didn't seem as comprehensive what we're talking about right now.
Exactly.
So I just want to clarify that that's not been done.
Right. Those studies are old. Since then, there've been a lot of changes in environmental law, and so any study we would do now have to be with current law, and so we have to really consider what current law and requirements are.
Any other questions from the board? Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Can you please repeat the motion?
Oh, sorry, I thought he had done that, but, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, can you repeat it aloud?
It's in the minutes, so this is what's going to go into the minutes, so this is what we're voting on.
I can project. The board will either have PPEC, which is...
Performance Programmatic Equity.
Thank you. Or the administration pursue an independent review of fields we control and a long-term feasibility study.
Nays or abstentions?
Nay.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion carries.
Just a cause for concern, there's no money, there's no dollar amount that was put into that. So basically you're saying we're not doing anything if there's no dollar amount that's been put into that motion.
Yes, that is why I made my statement that I did before we voted, because it's not because I don't want, people to think about what are we going to do with these fields, how can we best utilize them, but if you don't have a dollar amount and you don't have who is going to actually make the study, it means a little bit less than nothing, which is,
So I would expect
basically
that,
pretty small.
I would ask that Mr. Perrin pursue the costs for us so that we could prove the expenditure. But at least the request from the board is crystal clear, such as it is. And I think it was what you had discussed in the Finance Committee for the most part. And so when you bring those to us, I'm sure this board will be happy to discuss funding. Moving on, budget development.
We do have a draft schedule that we shared with the Finance Committee. Would you like me to take it just a minute, Christina, to review it, or do you want to just look at the document?
Oh, sorry, these folks didn't get one. Sorry.
Christina, will we assume council in, or you guys want to do budget? Maybe some on the agenda.
We'd love to do council today, if the council wants to stay. Especially because we were talking about student representation at the end, because I knew you had honor society, wasn't sure what time would hit. So if you can, it would be great.
How far down the agenda?
So, I'm thinking we're gonna, you know what?
What do you think you could bump it up?
I think I could bump it up if it's okay with the board.
Right after budget.
Right after budget? Does that sound good?
Sure.
Right after we finish budget development sort of overview, which should be 10 minutes or so, we'll bump you up. I got all head nods from the board. I love small board rules. So L2 is going up under B. It's your new C, budget development. Take it away, Frank.
Okay, this document should be fairly familiar to most of you that have worked with us over the years on budget development. So basically just a draft timeline of beginning to focus on some of the components of the budget process. So certainly this is not a comprehensive list. It's a topical of key dates. Maybe to begin on line 26 there, Public School District Annual Town Meeting, budget vote. So if we look at that, that date sort of drives a lot of decision points in the planning process. So that's the third week in Tuesday. I believe that's what the electorate assigned on June 25th, right, when we had our annual meeting. So we set that date. So working backwards from that date, February 5th, you see on line 17 is a proposed date for this board to approve a budget. That gives a few days to write our board reports, our superintendent reports, that goes into an annual report that's published and then distributed. And we were thinking this would get us a document out a little before town meeting as well. Again, working back from February 5th, this schedule calls for 3 draft reports for the full board's review. It's not unusual to have 2, sometimes we have 4. It depends on the year and the issues. But as a starting point, as a draft document, you see we've got a first draft for the board review, December 18. What is a benefit of having a March vote instead of a February vote for the high school is that it gets the legislature in session, and by law they're supposed to give us preliminary statistics on December 15th, and unfortunately they've not been hitting that target. They've been giving us funding assumptions well into January, and then oftentimes we have to revise our proposals because of that. So to start much earlier than December 18th for a first draft, you really don't have a full picture. But we did think that having an expense side as a draft would be a useful starting point. And obviously, as you know, the revenue side gets more defined once the legislature is in session in early January. They start providing us with updates. That's when a second draft may be informed by that, January 8th. And then certainly the third draft that could be the 22nd, becoming a final draft. But if necessary, we could have a fourth revision on February 5th. But typically, we look for a final draft before your final public information review. So, some key dates.
I had a couple of questions.
Sure.
One is the steps 3 through 8, which are the assumptions and the reviews and, all of those things. Are there, I assume there are documents associated with those and information and stuff. I'm wondering if we could, on November 20th and December 4th, have presentations about what those are and maybe get the documents ahead of time, just so that we understand a little bit more about what's going on. None of us have done this before. In fact, some of the people here haven't done a budget before, or at least maybe more than once.
I think I've worked with everybody, myself personally,
Yeah.
on budget development, except Emily and Thomas. But
That's a quarter of our board.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we could have get presentations on those things as well. I mean, strategic and action plans and the census information and staffing status and the special ed service plan. We hardly ever see those things. It would be really, I think it'd be really helpful to just know more about that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And the other thing is there work that gets done by the finance committee in terms of developing the budget or specific items or things like that?
That's a really important question. We just start. It appears that we will not have a finance committee for the supervisory union, right? Because it's a 5-member board, and you're not going to have 2-member finance committee. And for this supervisory, this school district, the merged school district, that's a good question. With an 8-member board, it doesn't seem to be such a large board on such an important, comprehensive look at what we're doing to have an 8-member board consider, every assumption that is made. But it's a good question if you think a subcommittee might be more constructive in reviewing components of it.
Actually, I think the opposite. I think it would be, especially since it's our first time through, I think if we could do it all right here, all of us, because we're all going to have to explain it, and we're going to have, well, anyway.
That's what I envisioned. I envisioned that based on the way I've seen this board work, that particularly given it is the first run of a comprehensive budget, that the full board would want to participate in every process.
What does it mean to participate in every process? You mean like all of these numbers?
So when we're on on any of the board meeting agendas, it's having a comprehensive budget proposal of all school sites, all programs, all grade levels. As opposed to what many, the legacy has been is that, certain boards have only looked at elementary budgets and other boards have only looked at, secondary 9 through 12 budgets. So this is, that's what I mean by comprehensive.
So just a point of clarification then. So number 1, like David said, it's special ed service plan developed by WSESU for AOE. So comprehensively, that wouldn't be included?
It has to be, yes. No, the state law requires a document to go to the agency of ed by October 16.
So that already passed though.
Had to be done, had to be submitted, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did we, I was not present at the last finance committee, but did we review that or?
No,
okay.
no, it's not typical.
Okay, so there's some things on this, just to be clear, because I want to know where we're weighing in. So there's some things on this list that aren't included in what we would be reviewing.
The work that is associated with these topics are integrated into the budget proposal that you would review. So there's a significant amount of work that the administration does, primarily with superintendent and principals, who then engage with the teachers to develop assumptions. They get integrated into the comprehensive plan, and then what we're talking about is having the board see all of the detail of that plan.
So seeing the first draft.
Yeah.
So like looking at number 8, admin review staffing assignments, I'll meet with each principal, look at all their staffing. If they've decided in their budget work lead up, then if they need to change staff, people that are retiring that they know, that type of thing. And then you will, when we present this budget, that's when you can ask questions of them. But some of these bullets are the work that we're doing as an admin team before we get to you.
So, I'm sort of curious because this is the first real challenge in budgeting we took up till now. It's like, hey, we just take what you got, we just stick it in front of the voters. So, could the board expect that Lyle is going to be kind of the great arbiter of equity between the schools? I mean, it seems like that is a good way to look at it, and then the board would, you know, if you said, I'll just throw Dummerston on the bus. Dummerston's decided they wanted to have pre-K for, you know, newborn through 5, so I'm going to do that. And so we'd say, no, I don't think that's right. So you're going to, that is part of your plan to, however your view of equity is between all of our schools, to kind of try to manage that. Oh, that's going to be a fun job for you, Lyle.
I've already made some people angry.
Well, we will be, I mean, I think those are the questions that we will be interested in assuring, because I think that's where there has been a lot of concern that we have a vision of what equity is, and that we can articulate it, and we can explain it to the taxpayers, and it is in keeping with the values of our shared values as a community of 4, so that will be interesting.
And there are a lot of factors we need to consider. I mean, equity is one of them. We are very close to the cap, and yet we have a very changing student population that we have to meet the needs of. So there are lots of things that we're going to be discussing and weighing.
Thank you.
So
we just lost a quorum.
computers are still in.
So I'm going to adjourn for 3 minutes. Sorry. 4. We need 5. We're reconvening at 9:04. I would really like to be out of here in a half an hour. So for the rest of the budget timeline, I think we're clear on this, and everybody has their initial questions answered, and this is going to be so much fun. You guys are going to love it if you've never done a budget before. They're not here.
So we just want to, you know, not that this is inflexible, but if any of these dates don't seem to be workable, it would be good to know soon, because obviously we'll schedule a lot of work that allows us to deliver, you know, the results here on this date, and if the dates change, then it's hard to deliver the results.
Anything you can anticipate that would make it have to change?
It's a board schedule. No, this is all about boards being available to meet on these dates, and this being realistic from your point of view in terms of work. One major issue that may change some of our final results is the health commissioner process of reviewing the results of our health benefits for the entire system. And obviously we can't resolve salary until we know what the largest component of benefits impact is.
Will there be a time of day?
It would be helpful to let me know what's good, but typically if you want to continue with the 6 o'clock board meetings, that's good. But if you want to change, these dates are generally on your board meeting dates. They're either the first or the third Wednesdays.
And the first Wednesday of January is New Year's Day, so obviously that's not really the first Wednesday.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you may want to consider, well, we'll just go later. I don't know. If anybody has a strong feeling about timing to start earlier or versus go later, please send me an email, and then I will do some scheduling discussions, doodle poll, whatever it takes. But we'll just consider it 6 o'clock unless I hear differently, and then we are allowed to schedule online. We can do that if that meets.
Just so you know, the WSESU meeting dates are here as well for those of you who are the WSESU reps.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Moving on to L2, student representatives from the BUHS Student Council. We had talked about this. we had talked about this long ago, early on in the process of how we could incorporate students into this, especially BHS students who can, follow along with Robert's rules and all. And Gus reached out to me 2 weeks ago or so, saying that, letting me know that in the past, representatives from the student council had come and sat in on the meeting. And I said, that sounds lovely, but I would get approval from the board, and maybe we could discuss some way you could have a preferential seating or something, or some way to be part of the conversation with the board that is not just in the public role, but because when there's a hot topic, we have to limit comment from the public, but if you're coming representing a body in sort of a quasi-board, but I want to bring that past the board before I do any bending, stretching, or, changing of past practice for the board. So with that, Gus, do you have anything you want to say? I'm sorry, I don't know we have not met.
Hi, I'm Megan Clerk, a freshman. Thank you.
Yeah, in the past, we just had a student council tag with the yellow ones at the table, and we never voted into any of the motions or anything, but when I was there, I was definitely involved in certain things, mostly anything student related. I think as far as we didn't try and crowd the table. We only sent 2 or 3 people, usually 2, or myself sometimes alone. But I think something we could do this year is definitely try and we'll have us be consistent like we were with the old board. And then also have some sort of way, whether it's on sort of our bulletin board in the hall or something, where we can bring up student topics, not just from student council. So often we've come just to present what student council is doing, but that's just student council, right? That's just one of our dozens of clubs and organizations at the high school. So I think to start off with, it would be great just to keep us persistent and at the meetings. Whether that's official or unofficial, and then we can go from there. I don't know.
So maybe a nice way to proceed, like we have an administrative report, we could have a student council representation, put it early on in the agenda, so you can whip through the warrants and the minutia at the beginning, and then
right. And then if there's anything you guys have or want our input on, and then let us know later in the agenda, or if there's something coming up, then.
That would be.
Yeah, I think the only thing we need is just a schedule of location and time, and we can definitely have. We just inducted 17 new members 3 weeks ago, so we're close to 30 strong. We might be over 30. So we can have 2 people there at the meetings and stuff. So
I would like to make a motion that we make a place at the table for the BOHS student council representatives, and to have them placed at the table with name tags and much appreciation.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
I have a question.
Oh, sorry.
So would the students be, just logistics, maybe it can be figured out later, but are the students rotating or same student?
rotating. Well, just whatever. We'll get.
Somebody will come.
It could be some of the same faces, maybe not. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when, let's say for example, like the turf comments, I guess I wonder how, it doesn't reflect I want a student at the table, I'm just wondering, like, there are personal perspectives, there are some group perspective, and how are you gonna get the full body's perspective? Because some of the issues that come up that we might want to comment on are pretty,
So yeah, so I think we would only be there to represent the student council and the topics we've been charged with to bring to the table. If I were to come and voice my opinion for the turf field or something I'm trying to push through, I would come as a member of the public. And we, with our 30 strong, we'd definitely have other people to fill, so.
Student council's also done a good job of getting student voice. Like when we talk about our long block ACE, they actually came with data to share, so they've done a good job of getting student voice.
We need student voice. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion to make a place at the table for our student representatives? Give them name tags. Did I catch everything? Please say aye.
Aye.
Nays, abstentions? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it.
So I think the only thing we need is just an email schedule. And we'll be-
Okay, so I will, I think we have a good list. We have to look at our schedule for the next part of the year, and yes.
Point of clarification, you know that we do travel to different towns, so it would have a certain transportation issue to it.
Do you guys have one tier per month?
Yes.
So it's like always the first this year, right?
The first meeting of the month is right here.
So we can get back to you on that, but.
Yeah, I mean, that would be, if that works out to be easier, you know, or Guilford, or,
Right.
I mean, there are, Delmerson is not very far
Right,
away.
we have
but I mean-
members from all over, so.
Yeah, yeah, great, thank you.
And I think I would ask if the student council has an issue that they want to bring and present and talk about, send it to me so I can put it on the agenda. If there's materials to send to the board beforehand so we can have it, things like that. I mean, we'd love to work on that kind of stuff, so that sounds really fun to us. So I think I can speak for the board.
Quick summary. We'll just get a quick summary of what we're doing.
Excellent.
So currently, we are working on kicking off Project Feed the Thousands, which is primarily a food drive. It's going to end on December 20th, but the tentative kickoff is on December 5th. And other than that, we have student parent-teacher conferences tomorrow, and we're doing a bake sale to raise some funds, get the word out there that we are a club, and other than that, not much is going on.
There's lots of stuff going on.
Yeah, yeah. Nothing.
Thank you, student representatives, I really appreciate that.
What item on the agenda?
So this, we moved up, there was an add to the agenda early on for student representatives. No, I think it was the final, I can't remember. For student representatives from the BUHS Student Council, but we moved it up because they've had a very long day already.
Okay, yeah, because I don't even see it on the agenda that
Was that an ad? I can't even remember now.
Okay, well, I'll, maybe you can you email me your updated agenda?
I will. I should have done that beforehand, Wendy. I will do that.
Okay, thank you.
We have some executive sessions. I expect it will take about 10 minutes. We have 3, one under 1 VSA 313.7 and 2 under 1 VSA 313A1. One is the academic record or suspension or discipline of students, and the other 2 are probable litigation to which the district may be a party. We will be taking action afterwards. Is there a motion to move into executive session?
So moved.
Yes, second.
We should invite Steve Parent.
We'll invite Steve Kiernan in for the first, and all those in favor say aye.
And actually, Steve and Keith.
So I'm calling the meeting back to order at 9:35. We are not out of here at 9:30 in case you haven't missed it. So I would entertain a motion to accept the recommendation of the administration on the academic record suspension and discipline of students.
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All those in favor of the motion to accept the recommendation of administration, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I would accept the motion to accept the recommendation of administration on the first issue we discussed on possible litigation, the district to which the district may be a party.
So moved.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Ann. All those in favor?
Aye.
Nays or abstentions? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. And I would entertain the exact same motion to accept the recommendation of administration on the probable litigation to which the district may be a party.
So moved.
Thank you, Ann.
Seconded.
Thank you, Thomas. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays, abstentions, the ayes appear to have it. The motion passes.
I'm astonished that Olga's writing, or Wendy's writing as fast as you're talking.
Poor Wendy.
It's all right. I have my little shorthand.
Ann and I had a discussion, and I would entertain a motion to amend the previous pride flag.
We did it already.
You did that already?
Yes. I think I messed up your rearrangement of the
Oh!
rearrangement, so.
It passed.
Yeah, it passed, it's done, it's all good.
Anne was very
I'm like, was I here for
efficient.
that? Okay. Okay, awesome. In Finance Committee, Frank has been traditionally taking the minutes, and it is making it harder for him to be a full fully participatory in Finance Committee. Finance Committee is quite a heavy haul. Just reading the warrants alone could sap your whole week. And so we discussed the need to approve funds and find a minute taker for Finance Committee meetings, which tend to be an hour. And wanted to bring that for the board to discuss expending that. I think it would put it out at a similar rate that we have these meetings recorded.
The committee doesn't have a clerk, so obviously nobody wants to be clerk.
It's really hard to follow Finance Committee and all the, at this point, in this juncture in our lives with budgeting season on us and all those warrants and everything else, it's hard to be clerk of that.
Well, I'm just thinking that the budgeting is going to be done here, so I'm wondering if we're still going to need it.
But other Finance Committee meetings, it's a similar, going through paperwork and you're trying to follow the paperwork and trying to take minutes is very tricky, so.
Frank has been really nice to do it for us.
Oh, I know, but and if nobody in the committee can do it, or if it's totally impractical and limits the ability of the committee to function, then we need somebody to do it.
That was my feeling, sitting in the committee.
I'm clerk of 3 committees, so
I know, you're the best.
I understand it, but I can type and listen at the same
You
time.
join the finance committee?
I come to all of them anyway, so I might as well.
Yeah,
At least all the ones that have to do with warrants. So. Maybe I'll just do warrants and then take the minutes. How much are you going to pay?
Any further discussion? Yeah, we should consider that. That's another motion that we'll warn it another day.
No.
All those in favor of the motion to approve funds for a minute taker for the Finance Committee, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays, abstentions, the ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, the motion carries.
Who made that motion? Sorry.
The motion was to approve funds for a minute taker for the Finance Committee.
Okay, but who made it?
So we didn't
I'm
actually
sorry, did
move
I
it,
not?
you just brought it up.
I'm sorry. Oh my gosh, I'm losing it.
I'll move it.
Thank you, Sean.
And I'll second it.
Thank you, Ann.
All right.
As a Bob's Rule Board, we can just do it that way.
I know, David, I know. There was a request from the public to approve funds for Finance Committee taping. We had that last time we agreed to tape that single Finance Committee one, but especially with budgeting season upon us, although it'll be done in the full board. But anyway, there was a request from the public, and I wanted to pass it by the board to see if the board was interested in expending funds. It would be, when the Finance Committee occurs before the standard meeting, it would be $100. If it's a standalone meeting, it's $150.
And this is not in perpetuity, this is just for certain ones coming up, right?
Well, I think it would just be through the end of this, this session of this board, and then the next board would decide if they wanted to continue that practice of filming, because you re-up it every year, so it's at the,
So it'd just be the first meeting of the month. The first hour of the first meeting of the month, starting at 5. 5 to 6.
Kind of like what Rich did
6
today.
to 12 for the regular meeting.
And what's the rationale? I mean, the budget work is going to be done here, so what's the rationale for having that?
Well, it was
people were
actually
asking.
a member of the public requested it.
Yeah.
I personally don't care one way or the other.
I just, we're spending $100 here, $100 there, and it gets to be real money.
Yep.
And if the budgeting was going to be done there, and we weren't going to, either that's how I would find out what's happening, then I would be glad to see it. But it just seems like, there certainly can be arguments made for all of the committees to be televised. It's really important work.
Well, it does sort of change my feeling too, now that budgeting is going to be done with the full board.
Yeah.
Because with all that money being expended, and all these pots moving around, in this first year budgeting, I felt very strongly that the budgeting process should be filmed.
And it will be. Yeah.
And now will be, so that will be, yes.
I made the suggestion, and I made the suggestion because I think the Finance Committee was taking on a lot of things that needed to be public, and I would hope that they would continue to have the filming, and I even volunteered to pay for the first one, but you went ahead and did it anyway. She has it in the minutes. Yes, it does. I still think because of what they handled, that it's important to have it filmed.
Do we know how many people watch? I'm sure we can get some
Oh my
stats.
gosh, you get hits on your thing, so you can figure out.
I'm looking at it right now, I don't see any hits. I don't see like a place,
On
like
the
YouTube,
YouTube
you
video?
can see like how many.
Yeah, how many people
YouTube should
sign
show
up?
you.
No, but it's
How
not
many-
on
how many
YouTube, on
viewers?
VCTV. I don't.
There are two It's on YouTube also.
Yes.
Oh, so you have to log on to YouTube to find out how many
Yeah.
hits?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so is it always that all hits would be categorized for
That's
YouTube?
also
Like,
on.
nobody's watching on a different
No,
platform?
people are watching on BCTV in the middle of the night when it's on.
Okay.
Yeah, people
So
watching on their computers.
is there a way, just
It's
wondering,
also-
is there a way for
rerun of
BCTV to track that, so we know, like,
Yeah, not I.
I can find that out, I can
I was
can
just
email
curious
Blackton
to know,
and
like,
see.
Yeah.
what,
The office
want-
knows, I don't.
and if we wanted to do finance committee for a little while, we could always track and see how important it is to
We
people.
have a motion on the table?
We could put one on the table.
Okay, I move that we do not authorize BCTV to finance, to film the finance committee meetings at this time, and we might revisit it later.
Second.
Any more discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays, abstentions?
I abstain.
I abstain.
Oh. Darn, I don't know what this means then. I think the motion passes. We lost Kelly. Well, there is no motion there is no motion on the table to actually finance it, so that would have to happen anyway.
Yeah, we
so
don't need a
we're taking
motion
no
to not
action.
finance it.
So that's even a weirder motion.
Do we need a motion to inquire about the note taker for the finance meeting?
We had that approved.
We already approved it.
We approved that.
Okay.
We were on to the next one. I know, it's tough. I'm
I'm
trying to get you, I know, I'm trying to get you out of here. Trying to get you out of here.
He left the bag.
The committee taping. So it doesn't sound like we're gonna tape at this point. We can revisit it. Budget meetings are gonna be done with the full board.
So that motion failed?
So that motion did not pass.
Oh, you're going to the conference?
No, it did pass.
It didn't pass, but
It did pass. I'm sorry, the motion to film, right, it's a negative motion. You're killing me, Sean.
There wasn't a positive motion
Yes.
for the negative motion to
Right.
stop, so nothing changed.
Thank you.
So it pretty much passes.
What time is it? It must be midnight.
Okay.
Based on that
Stick with me, we're almost there. Committee mission statements, there's no way we're undertaking this now, we're tabling that. I need this one for tomorrow, folks, so the one last issue that we have to take action on, I'm gonna table VSBA dues, because I'm gonna lose a quorum in a minute. The VSBA resolutions, our good friends in our sister district, Vernon, had concern about one of the motions that was excluding the private pre-K partnerships. And their board had extensive talks about it. They had good bandwidth to do that. It was a subject of great debate in the VSBA board of directors, at the board of directors level. So I wanted to understand from this board, because I'm the representative tomorrow, I leave at 6:30 in the morning to drive to Lake Maury to cast the vote for this district. So I need to know if we're going to agree with Vernon and ask for that and vote that amendment down, or ask them to strike the language on pre-K partnerships. Yes, David?
Well, how do I say this? A couple of years ago, when the bill was being, the pre-K funding bill was being worked through, there was a lot of resistance. When I was in your seat as the rep up there was a lot of resistance to supporting, anything other than processing the money and sending it through. There was a lot of resistance and criticism of like building bright futures and Let's Grow Kids. They were described as advocates, like special interest groups and stuff. And I don't know, I never did understand exactly what the root of it was, but I was the only voice opposing it at that point. But I suspect that you support, you have partners. And we certainly have plenty of partners, so if there's anything, if they're excluded, it's definitely not in our interest to support that, although well, never mind whether you get outvoted or not.
I think I referred Carrie to the discussion that happened at the board level, because it was sort of a political piece, I think, from the VSBA standpoint, but there was a lot of concern on the ground about, wait a minute, this is the situation we're in now in Vermont. We require pre-K partnerships to make this whole thing work, and we should try to be working with them. So I need a determination. Thomas, I think.
I didn't get to read it yet. That came through this afternoon, right?
Yeah.
I didn't get to
So no worries.
to make an opinion.
So Carrie, do you have a brief synopsis you could possibly?
I can try. So I think our issue, as you stated, was we have some very good private pre-K partners. And we felt as if striking this line, which discusses supporting private partners, would in a way feel to us like a slap against them. In watching all of the VSBA board discussions, I do think that the VSBA is looking at it from more of a political standpoint, that when they go in to lobby the legislature, they want to go in with the full force of, we're here to support public pre-K. So I get where they're coming from, but I don't think we're not at a point right now where we could do public pre-K without all of our private partners. It just wouldn't work. So, at least to me for the time being, and to I think my board, we felt let's continue to support our private partners until we're at a different position. But that I think is a whole nother discussion to have. You know, I'm not sure we're ever going to get to a point where we can have nothing but public pre-K.
It'll be a long time.
And we should talk about whether we want that or not. But right now, we just felt that striking this language would be going against all of our very good, qualified, hardworking, quality private partners.
Having just read all the warrants yesterday and seeing all the pre-K partnerships, it's a lot of money, it's a lot of time, and it's a lot of dedication by those institutions. So I would say that we ought to make a motion that we do not agree with that tendency of the Vermont School Board, what is it? The Vermont School Board?
Vermont School Board Association.
To start to exclude pre-K partnership agreements.
So then I will.
That would be my motion.
So I just want to, as part of the, is there a second on the motion?
Second.
So I just want to clarify, because I will try to amend that to strike the language about the pre-K partnerships. And so that will be that is the will of the board, that is the will of the board, that I strike that language that is excluding of pre-K partnerships. If that motion doesn't, if that motion doesn't pass, I either have to vote up or down on it. Yes.
I think you actually want to unstrike the strike.
Unstrike the strike, thank you. Unstrike
We don't like the strike, we want it unstricken.
Unstrike the strike, right.
So the motion is for us to support the inclusion of private partnerships.
Yes.
The pre-K thing, yeah. Just a couple of things. Sean, you mentioned that it's a lot of money, and it's not money, it's money that comes to the school district, but it comes from the state specifically to go to the yeah, it's not revenue that we raise in our taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
Okay.
has a good, strong revenue stream.
Yeah.
And they're all established institutions.
Yeah, and they're all really high quality.
You know,
And I think that's a continuing issue with the.
Like what was just mentioned, that we couldn't do it by ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think it's a
we have a
continuing,
choice.
it's a continuing issue with the SBA, that they look at everything in terms of the legislature and being effective in the legislature. And if it means abandoning something like that, you know, striking that language and not being seen as advocates or having a really solid line on that, and we don't agree with that, I think we have to ask you to vote against the bill as well, because it'll look, if you vote for it, it looks like, yes, the VSBA was unanimous in this effort. That if that remains stricken, that you also vote against it, so that it's not a unanimous or overwhelming vote.
So the first motion is that we will unstrike the strike. That motion's on the table. Has it been seconded?
Yes.
I didn't hear it. Who seconded it?
I did. Yep.
David seconded, okay. So let's vote on that motion, and then we'll do another motion for me to vote against the motion if the unstriking of the strike does not occur.
So that's the whole motion, unstrike the strike? Just wanted to make sure I got that.
All those in favor of the motion to unstrike the strike of the VSBA resolution regarding private pre-K partners, please signify by saying aye. Nays, abstentions?
Nay.
The ayes appear to have it, the ayes do have it. And then the next motion would be to vote, the board recommends the representative votes against the motion if we cannot unstrike the strike.
So moved.
Second.
I have a question.
Yes.
So is this the only thing you would be voting on in that? I mean, like, is there other language that you would be voting down if you moved against it?
Yes.
And is that other language important to us?
Carrie, do you have that?
I was so close. It's section 3, part G. Now I just have to find, I think I can find it.
What planet do those people live on?
Well,
Montpelier.
You're right, Dan.
there is some turf wars, as it were, over who will educate young children, so.
One of the things I really do not like is casting aspersions in a public meeting against anybody. Somebody from Montpelier, or somebody from Vernon, or somebody from Guilford. I just think it's anti-productive, and I hate it.
Don't do it.
Thank you.
Well said, Sean.
So actually, it's not on this link, unfortunately. These are the local ones, or the ones that people have done. It's not, this was the ones for the.
Here. Should be on this list of resolutions.
It had live links in it.
Well, yeah.
It's in your agenda, is it not?
Yeah.
It was
List of resolutions. But I feel like there's another one.
We still got 5. We still got 5. So we don't have to. We still have 5, Sean, we don't have to. We're almost, this is,
I still
they're
feel
not here.
guilty
Why are the
because I left
resolutions not
early
here?
on
It's the other one.
It's not in the resolution?
Okay,
It's not in the ones that the link goes to. I'm going to the VSBA website.
Are you kidding me?
Oh, wait, let's see. Bylaw changes, I'm almost there.
This is the last item, is it not?
Yes, it is the last item, and we're down to the
Okay.
minutia.
While you guys are all looking, can I just say,
You have another item.
the Kripskis are hoping to keep that as confidential as possible. So if you were at the meeting tonight, or if you're watching this now, don't tell Bob about the auditorium.
Oh, great.
How can they keep that?
They won't do it, but
It's been all over
don't
Facebook
purposely
and
go
email.
out.
It has been everywhere.
It has been.
It has been everywhere. It's been discussed everywhere with every theater,
And you don't
ex-theater
think that
person
the
ever.
5,000 people outside the auditorium might give
Better
it away?
go. Yeah. I've done my duty.
Good work. I thought you were going to ask to leave so you could drive all the way to Lake Maury.
Can I go now?
Keep going. These are, this isn't right.
It's too late to be looking at really small text here.
You want to think what that language is?
Yeah, I don't know.
It
Could be.
It won't make much sense.
Why isn't it where it should be?
I know, I can't find
So
it.
annoying.
Do you know Kelly left after you came out of executive session?
During.
Can you just trust Christina to make the right decision?
Yeah. But then we wouldn't make a motion, right?
Oh,
If the rest of the
maybe
language
closer.
is really good.
Here we go. Okay, what did I say? 3E? Is that it? Or 3G? 2, finance?
Oh, what did you say it was?
Early education. Okay, do you want me to read it?
Yeah.
The VSBA encourages the General Assembly to create universal access to pre-kindergarten education through a system that emphasizes equity, quality, and simplicity. School districts should play a central role in assuring quality and accountability in publicly funded early education programs. So that's what will remain. The line we did not like that was current but is now going to be stricken. Private providers of early education services that meet high standards can and should play significant roles as partners with school districts and parents. So we wanted the whole thing to stay.
So it means you'd emphasize public pre-K, but you'd have partners where needed.
Right.
I think the,
Thank you, Karen.
the likelihood that, I mean, if you voted against it, if it didn't pass, the likelihood of the legislature taking any other approach than what's outlined in that resolution is very small. That's exactly what they've been doing since pre-K came up. It's gonna have zero actual impact.
And they have to realize the financial impact for school districts, because we would have to pick up all 4-year-olds at this point.
Yeah.
We can't do that.
And our student count, the effect on the per pupil, it's just, it's
Oh, there's
suicidal.
no way we can go to full public pre-K right now. That's not possible, and I think that was the whole discussion with the VSBA and just, but is this really the role of the VSBA to advocate for private partnerships? It's like a little bit of the question too. So-
Well, yeah, the VSBA is a private membership organization. And their purposes are not the same as school boards. Ours is to care for all the kids in our community
Yeah.
as much as we can. Theirs is to, whatever it is that they say is their goal.
Well, whatever we tell them is their goal.
Well, we'll see
So
if
shall
what
I
we tell
vote?
them.
So I shall vote no. So voting no against public pre-K is a real painful thing to do. It's just, I mean, it's, you know, I mean, I understand the logic of why our district might say, okay, no, if you're not going to include private pre-K partnerships, I'm not going to support this motion. But I do believe in the motion otherwise, so that I don't know what to say.
Say that,
Yeah.
and then vote no.
And then vote no? Okay.
Yeah, I cannot vote for this without
Well, we have to
private
move.
partnerships.
You
We
might
need-
talk
I need
other
to-
people into voting no too, or getting the strike back in.
Yes, Tara?
It's actually out of order to announce why you're voting no for something. So you'd have to word it really carefully when you are in the discussions on your point of view.
Is there a motion or just?
The motion is that I vote down the resolution. Did we get a second on that?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
David,
Okay. That we vote down if we can't unstrike the strike, that I vote down the resolution. Any more discussion? All those in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays, abstention?
Nay.
It was abstained, sorry.
Okay.
It's fine.
The motion carries. I will vote down the motion in the event that we can't unstrike the strike. And with that,
Madam Chair.
Next agenda?
Oh, next agenda.
What about the DSBA dues?
I said we're gonna table that.
Table
It's,
it,
there's
yeah.
just no
So
way.
that
It's
would
10 o'clock. 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, that would be next agenda.
10 o'clock
The
at
mission
night.
and goals.
So I have some agenda items listed there, maybe mission statements, maybe that'll be its lucky day, maybe VSBA dues, maybe that'll be its lucky day. I will give you a VSBA annual meeting update, and there has been a request for an executive session with elementary principals. It'll be about 30 minutes is what I'm thinking.
Yep.
So there is a little more time in there, or we could just all go home.
Also, David's asked principals to come just to answer some questions about budgeting, if I heard you right, early on in the night. You said something about on November 20th meeting.
Oh,
if-
no, for the 3 through 8,
Right.
to just come and talk about.
Talk about that.
Well, that would be principals doing that? I just assumed you and Frank would tell us
We
what it is.
could.
However you want to do it.
Okay.
Just,
Okay.
you know, like census numbers and
I
stuff.
just
it
told
wouldn't
them
take
they
much.
had to be here.
Well, fine, you can come.
Yeah.
Well, they're gonna be here for the.
They were gonna be here.
They were gonna be here anyway, so it seems like a good use of time and get to know your principals.
Christine, I'd like to add the posting of committee reports, like the reports we just gave, and communications with the minutes on the website. You had mentioned that would drive Barb nuts. So I think we need to talk about maybe having staff assigned to the, I mean, we're having staff assigned to the board so that information is posted.
So let's do that as part of a discussion. I just think we need to think about, like, if every communication's gonna get posted, how we would do that, you know, every board communication.
That's why I wanted to put it on the agenda.
So we'll do that next.
Are we
Yeah.
gonna also talk about in other business the leadership councils? We don't have to do that now.
Or we
I
have to
mean, I
redo
guess-
that policy.
That policy's coming through next time.
But we,
Oh, I
and
see.
so.
But the councils themselves.
Talking about
yeah.
actually assignments and if we're
Yeah.
going to rotate through or maybe just a first discussion on that, doesn't have to be super long at the beginning.
I think we can do that, yeah. There might be another leadership council by then. Okay, that's on. Yes, Jody.
Number 10,
Number 10, number 10.
public comment on non-agenda
Oh,
items.
right, public comment on non-agenda items. Yes, Jody.
I would like, I've been going through a lot of minutes and a lot of agendas and a lot of that whole bit. And it's come to my attention that a lot of agendas, particularly of committees, are not being specific about what they're talking about, number one. And number two, if it's not on the agenda, they're talking about other things. And I think it needs to be cleaned up. And especially if we're not going to film some things, I think it needs to be cleaned up.
Thank you for your input. People can add things as the first order of business, but
You know, Jody, it would be really helpful if you could bring some examples, because I'm thinking about the committees that I'm on, and that's not a problem. I don't see that as an issue.
I don't want to bring some examples in front of the film. I will talk to you later.
thank you for that. I appreciate that. Any other public comment on non-agenda items? Thank you. You guys are hardcore. With that, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
I don't know who to share. Oh, there being no further business before this board, I move that we adjourn.
I think I heard Thomas a second.
No, this is Ruth. Madam Chair, there being no further business before this board.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Names abstentions, the ayes appear to have it. We adjourn at 10:06.